What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? I'm the Godless Engineer, and I critically analyze apologists' claims to give you the best arguments and information so that you can stand up and use your voice. Tonight, we have Dr. Richard Carrier back with us. How you doing, Rick?
Doing all right.
Nice. All right. Well, now tonight we've got a requested video review for us to do, and it's not something that we normally cover. At least when I have you on, we're actually covering Christian nationalism, specifically an author's new book. Now, I want to start off by, I guess, giving you a chance, Rick, to kind of give us your thoughts on, I guess, Christian nationalism. What do you think about Christian nationalism in our current social and political environment?
Yeah, so this is something I've written on a lot. I even gave a speech on it on a state capitol once, Capitol Steps one time. That's the article Christian Nation Nonsense. Some of that comes from that, but then I used other material. But I've written on this before, point being, and it's not just the Christian nationalists, like the policy platform. It's all the revisionist history, the shit they make up that's not true, to justify those policy platforms. And that's, we'll get into that today when we talk about this book. Davidson is the guy, right? So what's his full name? It's
John something Davidson.
Yeah, hang on. Let's get that right. So the book is Pagan America, The Decline of Christianity and the Dark Age to Come. John Daniel Davidson is his full name.
Daniel.
Yep. Yeah. And I hope do you have clips from that video? Is that what we're going to get into?
Oh, yeah. So I've got 5 sections from the video where he covers some pretty, feel like obvious errors.
So we'll get into that. I did. So I sort of read the book. I have to say, I have so many thoughts. The guy's crazy. It is crazy pants Christian literature. Like, he literally believes in demons, and he has a whole chapter on how AI portends the arrival of demons influencing us through our computers. I'm not even joking. He thinks demons are real. He also, like, his explanation of the genocidal passages in Deuteronomy is that those weren't human beings. They were armies of demons that God was ordering the Jews to kill. With a straight face. Like, he's saying this like a straight face. And he thinks demons are behind everything, including Bernie Sanders. There's a lot going on in there. I didn't read the book like meticulously. I skimmed a lot of it, and then read key portions that I think are important. I read the conclusion, which I think was the most important, because that really tells you what he's selling. That's the other thing that we're going to get to, because we're talking a lot of what's going to come up in the video is what he's warning us about, and the idea of how Christianity, basically a false version of history. But they don't get too much into what he is proposing as the solution, right? So the whole idea of religion is you invent a problem that doesn't exist, and then you provide a solution for it. It's standard snake oil salesmanship, right? And sometimes that's, you're going to die, but you'll want to live forever. Here's a problem. We've got sin's holding you down. We got a problem. You got the sin juice inside you. Take this magic spell, and it'll get the sin out of you, and then you can be resurrected and sail to heaven in the sky. That's one form of it. But another is societal panic. Is the dark ages are coming. Our society is going to collapse because pagans, and therefore you need this particular version of this particular religion. Christianity, ultra conservative Christianity, is the only solution, and you got to like double down on it. That's the solve. But this results in specific policies, and so hopefully we might get to that as we go through the video, and we can talk. I've took some notes on which policies he actually is advocating, and where he is on all of this. But my interest in this is, I've written on it a lot, but also as a historian, they just destroy history. Like, they get history all wrong, especially the ancients. They get ancient philosophy wrong. They get the origins of democracy wrong. They get the origins of human rights wrong. They get the history of even it comes up in the video, which is just war theory, the idea of war crimes. They get the history of that all wrong. And so that irks me as a historian. So that's how I got into it. I was really annoyed by it. Ordinarily, I would just dismiss them as, ultra conservative cranks who are just a problem as voters that we need to outvote and prevent them from controlling things. But as a historian, I do want to talk about like all the mistakes they're making and all the false narratives they're telling about history. So that's why I'm here. That and the fact that we had a patron really wanted us to do that, to discuss this video and this book, and they funded it, which I really recommend and am really grateful for and appreciative of. So it's how I make a living. So it's great to get hired to go check these things out that normally I would just ignore as more bombast.
No, yeah. I mean, when I first looked at the video, I'm like, okay, so it's a crazy dude that's, on this show and he's saying crazy shit. Like, but as I listen more to it, it gets like worse as it moves on. And
Yeah.
finally right there near the end, we get to the whole Nazis thing.
Right. The book is worse than that even. It's worth pointing out that there's nothing like substantively new here. Like these books, like complaining about abortion and euthanasia and secularism destroying the world and Christianity has to save it. Like that stuff. I was looking at books like that and to critique them like 20 years ago, right? And I'm sure you could go back another 20 years and keep going and keep going. They're always producing these books. And I did an article recently on how I think modern Christian apologetics or contemporary Christian apologetics is in steep decline. Is that the sort of rational evidence-based idea, even though it's bogus, but they at least try to show some respect to rational argument and dealing with critics and things like that. That version of apologetics has been replaced with just like extremely low research, extremely poorly argued, contemporary moral panic stuff. And one of the things, like you won't get this in the video, but this guy's obsessed with sex. He's obsessed with gay people. He's obsessed with the trans movement. Like trans rights like freak him out. Like he writes about it constantly. He can't stand drag shows. Like they really freak him out. And it's, maybe we'll get into that later, but what is new is like how he's taking these old pictures and applying them to new things like social media and AI and things that are like quote unquote new, but are just iterations of the same things that people have been complaining about. Like, oh, television's destroying children and Western society. Now it's AI and social media and things like that. But anyway, yeah, we'll get into all of that. So
awesome. Yeah, and I'm just kind of curious. Do you think that the Christian nationalism is becoming more and more popular in in United States society? As we head into like this election season and everything like that, do you think it's taken a lot more prominent of a place, like at the forefront?
Yes, but only in the same way that racism has. So I think the thing that has happened with the Trump era, and you can attribute to this whole, like the Charlottesville incident and all of this stuff, it's all part of the same thing that's happened, which is that widespread racism is now public, right? Like people used to hide it. So it's not that there's more racists now. It's just that they're more open about it, right? Like, so, and Christian nationalism the same way. Like we've been complaining about and warning people about Christian nationalism for like my whole life, practically. I mean, it's been a problem since at least the Reagan administration, and you could probably go back further with its pernicious influence, but definitely by then, like it's a serious societal problem. But what's changed is that it's now cool to be out as a Christian nationalist and to, say, just basically say the quiet part out loud, right? Like, so it's basically what we're seeing is beliefs that people already had are now being voiced more. And so we're confronting them more. And in an attempt, what's happening is the Overton window might be moving. And I think that's what you might be worried about, is that Christian nationalism becoming more respectable or more normed. And what I would say is that it's the Overton window hasn't moved there yet, but it has moved toward it, which means that it doesn't feel as extreme as it really is, because people talk about it so openly. And like we have literally a presidential candidate defending an armed assault on the Capitol Like that would be inconceivable during the Reagan administration, but now here we are. That's the case. But so I think that's an example of it. We have actual insurrectionist Congress people, like in Congress. So that's a thing.
Well,
that it's not like they have more power. It's just that they can be more open about it, and that is a problem, and we do need to fight it. But it's not like it's a rising wave of like new influence. They've always had the influence. They've just never been public or admit it, basically.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you have, I don't mean to play guilt by association, I guess, but you also have Clarence Thomas, his wife, Ginny Thomas, who was very, I guess, I think that she was considered instrumental, like in the January 6th stuff. And,
and so that's an example of something we would normally never have heard about, but I'm sure it happened before, right? Like normally you wouldn't be engaged in that activity. Like it would all be, smoke-filled room. It would all be backroom stuff, right? Like you would never get your name attached to doing it, but you would do it anyway. But now it's, it's just fucking flying an upside down American flag right out your freaking house. Like that's just that's where we are, right? It's just let's just be honest, I guess.
Yeah, I like that one because it was basically Alito's wife got called a name and she got so fed up she decided to like make a very public statement about her protesting being called a name.
Yeah. So I do think in the sense that we do need to keep fighting it. I mean, we're not losing the battle, but it is now an open battle. It's not like the Cold War where everything, all the combat and war was cloak and dagger. Now it's out in the streets, basically.
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, I've got 5 segments that we're going to try to get through. Some of them, a couple of them are kind of lengthy. I've managed to cover a good portion of the entire video, so hopefully I don't miss anything. But if there's something that you remember and I don't have in my clip, I can find it easily. And
we should explain to the audience what the video is. So
okay.
It's like one of those talking head interview shows like you would find on Fox News, but this is a YouTube channel. It's an ultra conservative YouTube channel. It's kind of like one of those Fox is too liberal for us kind of news media organizations. And the channel is Breaking Point, but they sometimes have this sort of sub show, this other show on that channel called Counterpoint. And Counterpoint has a conservative, Emily. She's a writer and editor for The Federalist, and Ryan, who's a well-known progressive journalist. And so it's so you've got your Democrat and your Republican, basically, and then they have some guests on, and then they talk, basically. And I don't know if you noticed it, like there's several little digs that Emily throws at Ryan about how liberal he is and how he's an atheist and things like that, but they never outright say it. It's just like she digs at it, and you can wait. She must know that he's an atheist. Why would she say that? But anyway, so that's so you understand this is a YouTube show. It's a well-produced, well-funded YouTube show by real journalists. Like the hosts are actual journalists, actual writers, so it's for this purpose of. That's why you have an ultra conservative guest on this Counterpoint. Is the channel is ultra conservative, and so they totally want to promote wackadoo stuff like this.
Oh yeah, I thought I didn't realize it was mainly on YouTube, or really only on YouTube, produced for YouTube, because it
so
definitely.
Far as I know, I don't know that it's on any network, and that's why you'll notice there's no network Clytron underneath.
Right,
it's just the YouTube.
The Breaking Points.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. It actually the logo for the actual channel reminded me of on CNN. They got this Bleacher Report, which is a sports show, but the icon for both of them seems similar. So I'm like, oh, is this like an official kind of thing, like an extension of like a larger platform, or what?
Yeah, so, BP is Breaking Point, which is the channel, but Counterpoint is the show. So most of the video you'll see, it'll just say Counterpoint. It'll just have the Counterpoint logo underneath.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to get to this first clip here. And it's the only thing that I've cut out really is just the lead in that the more liberal host goes into asking this John Davidson, like basically to tell them about his book because the liberal guy hasn't read it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, which normally
Yeah.
Ryan, he says he normally reads the books of his guests. He didn't this time, which kind of, I think he's kind of off his guard, right? Like he was struggling to interact with this guy and to be, ask hardball questions rather than softball questions. But he had difficulty because he didn't really know what's in the book. So when I went and read the book, I was like, oh shit, how different this video would have been if he'd actually read the book and knew the subtext behind what this guy is saying. So people should be aware of that.
Right. Okay, so here's John Davidson. He's the guy that wrote the book, and I'm just going to let him play. So you just let me know whenever you want me to stop, okay?
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So Pagan America is an argument that there's really only one alternative to Christianity, and it's not secularism. It's paganism, right? And I don't mean that in a post-Christian era that we're in, as you say, many people in this country, a growing number of people are not practicing Christians, and a growing number don't even identify as Christians. I think in about 20 or 30 years, we'll have Christianity as a self-identified group, as a minority in this country for the first time ever, right?
And they might hear post.
Now, what do you think about that assessment there? Do you think he's pretty spot on? Like eventually Christianity is going to be a minority?
Yeah, that's the demographic trend. In all developed countries, actually, it's heading the same way. America's heading that way as well. So, yeah, his stats are right on that. And that's why this is a panic book, right? He's panicking because, well, this has already been happening. Like Christianity has already been pushing into a minority status, and Christians have always been in power and they've always had privilege. Now they don't have it. Now they're a minority. And so now they know what it feels like to have been on the other side of it. Like they were treating minorities all this time. Now they're being treated the same way. So they're reacting with panic about this. Like, oh my God, our values are destroyed. We're going to lose control of civilization. It's going to spin into craziness. And so that's what this guy's book is about how we're all going to the dark age now. And he said, you might wonder, like, and they never get into this in videos. You might wonder, like, what does he mean by pagan America? Like, does he think people have like secret altars to alien gods in their homes now or something? But obviously he's using the word pagan in a highly bogus, bizarre, rhetorical way. He does not mean, and he says in the book, that's like, I don't mean a return to polytheism, right? Like he doesn't mean that. What he means is he's just using a strange use of language to reframe an argument that has been going on. The usual way that Christians frame this is that people are dethroning God and replacing God with, and they'll have this long list of complaints. Like in his case, it's social media and transgenderism, right? Like it's too much sex. We're replacing God with sex, and so on. So the idea that we're dethroning God and prioritizing other things, he's saying is basically turning those things into idols, and therefore we're worshiping them. Therefore, they are our gods. So, diversity, equity, and what is it? DIE, diversity, equity, and
inclusion.
Is it inclusion? Yeah, DII.
Yeah,
DEI. That's right. Yeah,
DEI.
So that is a god. We are now worshiping the god of DEI, and therefore it's paganism. And so that's how he creates this dichotomy between Christianity and paganism. The problem is, of course, real paganism doesn't do that either. So, and it isn't real paganism. The word pagan is a bogus word that he's misusing, obviously, intentionally misusing, but still, it is a moral panic word. So he's playing on an affective fallacy. People react with fear to pagan. Oh, heathen, pagans, demons, right? But then what he's done is he's attached it to a thing that has nothing whatever to do with demons or polytheism or even religion, really, so that he can try and transfer your moral panic from the word pagan to those things he doesn't like, and say it's pagan. I say that to be charitable. That's my charitable reading of his book. But his constant segues into demons actually being responsible for all this stuff. Like there's a few points in his book where he actually kind of hints and suggests that we are actually worshiping demons. We just don't know it because demons are they're the puppet masters behind all of the things that we are quote unquote worshiping, like social media or AI. So he's kind of like in a sense that his Christian worldview is that you either worship Jesus or you worship demons, because there are no other options, right? There's just God and demons. That's it, dude. There's no third way. Which of course is illogical, because in reality, secularism is not gods, right? Like secularism is getting rid of gods. Secularism is founding your beliefs on rationalism and evidence rather than superstition, right? So it's the exact opposite of paganism, in the sense that he actually wants to characterize. So really, there's three ways. There's rational, evidence-based ways, demonology, and Christianity. And even with Christianity, there's only his ultra-conservative Christianity, and we might get into that later, that it is ultra-conservative Christianity, like fascist Christianity. All the other Christianities are paganism, right? So their decline of, so the social gospel, the civil rights movement, Christianity, demons, paganism, that's not Christianity. That is the decline of America. So the way that he's manipulating words and stuff can be disorienting, and you really have to like dig into the book to figure out, like, reconstruct his whole language that he's speaking and why he's saying it that way rather than some other way. But that's what this book is about, and so that's what he's kind of talking about, how like there's either Christians or you're pagans. So he's not really like doing a rational analysis of secular thought at all.
Right.
It's so anyway. So that's the frame up so far, and let's see what comes next.
Right. And I do want to remind people that if you want to ask us specifically a question, like concerning Christian nationalism or whatever this guy that we're reviewing says, do send a super chat, and we will definitely address those at the end of the show today. So if you want to get your question answered by either me or Dr. Carrier, definitely send a super chat.
Christian America and Ryan, you probably hear that and you think, okay,
post-Christian America is fine.
That's one of the digs, by the way.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Like, you probably hear like it's separation of church and state. It's the
you like that, don't you, liberal?
Decline of Christianity. You like that, don't you? Yeah, it's like, that's interesting. That's why I went and checked their bios. So like, okay, there's some dynamic here that I need to get clued in on. So I checked their biographies and now I know who they are and why that happened. But anyway, but there are a few moments like that where she'll just do a dig and then just keep moving on, and you might miss it if you're not paying attention. But
that America, as we know it and understand it, is only possible with a Christian people. In other words, a people who accept basic normative claims of Christian doctrine. Chief among them, the doctrine of Imago Dei, that each person is created in the image and likeness of God, and therefore has inherent dignity, from whence we get rights, freedom of speech, religion, consent of the governed, all of the things that we associate with our American system of government and our American way of life are products of Christian civilization. They can't exist.
100% false. All of those things come from pagans. Sorry, guys. Democracy, consent to the governed, human rights, everything he just listed is all in pagan thought before Christianity even started writing about these things. And none of these things are in the Bible. There's no writing about these things in the Bible. So you can't get it from the Bible. So you have to get it from later Christian thinkers. Maybe that's the best you could do. But they all post-date the pagan writings that established all of these principles that our nation is founded on. And in my article, for people who really want to deep dive that, my Christian Nation Nonsense article, which I think is in the description, that goes into this in detail, including what I did is I analyzed Adams's book, like one of the founding fathers himself. He wrote a book about the historical background of what they did when they created the American government, the Constitution and stuff. And so he wrote 4 volumes on, I think it was 4. It's multiple volume history. No Bible, no Christianity in there. He lists all of the primary inspirers of the Constitution and our form of government and our values and stuff like that. He gives a list of them. He gives a list of ancient pagans, and then he gives a list of modern, or more, what was to him, modern thinkers that were engaged in evidence-based reasoning rather than Bible-based reasoning. And so when you look at it that way and you start looking what's going on, you even look at how the Constitution, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution actually outlaw half the 10 commandments. Like they're specifically written to prohibit those commandments from becoming law and to command the opposite of those commandments. So they were actually dismantling Christianity, or trying to, without just outright banning Christianity, because they wanted freedom. That it was necessary to have religious freedom. You couldn't just ban the religion. You had to ban actions and behaviors based on evidence and reason as to what is bad and what is good, what do you observe to be bad and good, and so on, rather than relying on a religious text. But my article goes into that in some detail, and that's relevant here because, and then I get into other things in my other articles too. My article on Brierley has a lot of links in it, including the link to where I deal with Tom Holland, where this guy relies on Dominion, Tom Holland's book, a lot, and things like that, where we talk about where does the concept of charity come from? Where does the concept of charitable foundations come from? Where does the concept of human dignity come from? And all of that stuff, we can trace these things. And they're all pagan. They all come from paganism. And in fact, we had to get away from 1,000 years of medieval Christianity. We had to rebel against it, basically intellectually, to bring back the pagan ideas and start reframing them as Christian ideas to promote them, resulting in the American Revolution ultimately. And that's the actual history, right? So the actual history is we got back to paganism, and that led to this great experiment that he's calling America, and all of these things he listed. Those are all pagan ideas. They're not in the Bible. They're not Christian ideas, but they were reframed as Christian ideas to market them, because you had to market them to people who were freaked out by pagans. So you had to sell them as being Christian somehow. So you had to come up with elaborate things. He refers to the imago Dei concept, the image of God. That's Latin for the image of God. And he's saying like human rights come from that, this idea that everyone is the image of God. And that's not entirely true, right? So human rights, in the sense that our founding fathers adopted them, did come from something similar, which is the Stoic religious belief that we share reason with God, and therefore we're all a part of God, and therefore we are all equals. By nature, we are all equals. And we all have the same dignity. Well, we all should have the same rights. And the only way that the only way there's disparities, where the only reason you get slaves and things like that, is human intervention, human laws intervening on top of the law of nature. And so that's a Stoic idea, and that's relevant because we'll get to that later, because he's going to make claims about the pagans that are false by focusing on Aristotle. And everybody forgets that Aristotle was just the first guy, right? He's the first guy to systematize philosophy as a systemic system of thought. There were philosophers before him, but he's the first one to organize it and really create a sort of scientific model of philosophy. But he was wrong about half the things he said, and was corrected by subsequent thinkers within a matter of centuries, right? So you can't just go back to Aristotle and say, oh, well, like he does in the book, the Romans adopted Aristotle's view of slavery. No, they actually completely abandoned Aristotle's concept of slavery. They embraced the Stoic concept of slavery, which is the opposite of Aristotle's concept of slavery. And it's things like that where he's getting the history completely wrong because he doesn't check. And I did search his book. I tried to find any philosopher from antiquity that he would quote other than Aristotle, and he only cites Aristotle. So he's not aware of any history of philosophy after Aristotle, which is hundreds of years before the Roman Empire. So there's hundreds of years of history he's ignoring before the Roman Empire. Then you get to the Roman Empire and you have hundreds of more years of history that he's ignoring. So like Seneca never talks about Seneca. Like Cicero never talks about Cicero. I was just unaware. And these are the guys that were writing about human rights and the concept of like the idea that there's no natural slaves. I think we'll get to that later. So anyway, that's what's going on here at this moment. And when they get into more detail, we'll probably get into more detail ourselves.
Oh yeah, he goes into like morality, like where our morals come from, our ideas of morals, and how they're tied to Christianity, as well as the slavery topic too. And
yeah, he completely ignores the idea of a rational, evidence-based grounding of morality, right? Like that, all philosophy in the last 200 years has been about grounding morality without religion, right? Grounding it based on evidence and reason, and he just ignores that. And he says, well, if you don't have Christianity, then there's no foundation for morality. There's nothing. No one. We're all nihilists. There's only been nihilism in the entire history of philosophy. He'll go in about Marquis de Sade. Marquis de Sade, as if he's the only philosopher, and the only moral philosopher that has ever existed. outside of Christianity in the last 300, 400 years. That's how he acts, right? He just completely erases the entire history of philosophy in order to promote this view that only Christianity can save us and only it can ground our morals.
Yeah. And I've always considered, when he rattled off the whole list of things that apparently come from Christianity that are in our concept of government, our Constitution and just how our government is set up, I've always considered it to be very antithetical to a lot of the things that Christianity teaches. Like, the consent to the governed thing. That's never how it was ever supposed to be in Christianity. It's supposed to, you're supposed to defer to God and do everything for God with God in mind. So it really has nothing to do about the consent of the governed.
Yeah, right. And that's even the case when you look at the letters of Paul. You still have hierarchical authority, right? So it's Christ to apostles, to congregations, and then congregations, it's to the men over the women, right? So you have, and then slaves on the bottom. So you still have this hierarchical thinking. I didn't check. I'm sure he references the passage where Paul says, I didn't check if he did, but I assume he did mention the passage in his book where Paul says that there's no slave, no free, no male, no female. We're all the same. In context, that's not a reference to political rights. It's a reference to access to salvation. He means they're all equal in the sense that they will all receive salvation at the end of the world. He doesn't mean that they're all equal in the sense that they have equal rights, equal authority, equal vote, or anything like that. No, he's not talking about that at all. That's just not in there. That concept doesn't exist. Whereas you see a lot of reinforcing of gender hierarchy, reinforcing of master-slave hierarchy. That's all just taken for granted, never opposed, never condemned anywhere in the Bible. And of course, if you go to the Old Testament, it's even commanded, not just not denounced. It is, genocide and slavery are ordered. They're actually the commandments, the actual voice of God, Vox Dei, is saying, you should mass slaughter people and enslave them. And that's cool. Guys, go for it.
Do you think that this is maybe how he differentiates himself from white Christian nationalists? That he's still proposing this whole equality thing that is apparently in Christianity from the start. Whereas white Christian nationalists would be very,
Good question.
ethnocentric.
Now, notice he doesn't talk about race issues very much in his books. He only alludes to it. I only saw 2 instances when he alludes to it. One was when he denounces the social gospel and the civil rights movement. That's not a good look. And then the other time is when he denounces diversity and inclusion and equality, or whatever that DEI, whatever that is, that people freak out about. And he denounces that as something that has to be abolished, right? So those 2 hints suggest to me racism, but he just doesn't discuss it. So I think he is a white supremacist. I don't think he would say that. I don't think he would admit to it or frame it that way. He would waffle and create this, but I love everybody equally because Christ, etc. But there's Black people have too many civil rights. I think that's what would happen there. But so anyway, he doesn't go into it in his book much, but those hints are dark hints, and it doesn't look good. But what you bring up another issue that I ran into frequently throughout the book is the blatant self-contradiction. So he advocates here all of these important things, and he'll mention them multiple times: freedom of speech and freedom of conscience, right? Freedom of religion. These are fundamental American values. They're so important. But when you get to his final chapter about what we're supposed to do, oh my God, it's like fucking massive Christian fascism. I had to, let's see if I can get the thing. I had to write a bunch of notes because it's like, oh my God, this guy's like contradicting himself left and right. So here, where's an example of that, or I can give an illustration. Yeah, so okay. He wants to ban everything by law. So yeah, he advocates draconian. This is my notes. I said he's advocating a draconian and exclusivist control of society and local government that shuts down and bans anything in public contrary to his specific Christian ideals. And an example is that he advocates that Christians should take over public libraries and ban all the books that are against Christianity or that suggest anything that they don't like. So much for freedom of speech, right? Right out the window. He says that all public ceremonies and all public events should be exclusively Christian and only in alignment with his Christian sect. That no one else, no other religion should be allowed to have public displays or to like have a parade or anything like that. Those things should all be banned, and we should actively take over governments in order specifically to ban them. And so like freedom of religion, so much for that, right? Like, so like he talks about all these great American ideals, but he is against every single one of those ideals. He is the fascist that he thinks the pagans are. And you get a lot of that in his book, where he tries to paint what he calls the pagans as the fascists, but all that they're doing is preventing him from banning other people and their beliefs and writings, right? So he calls that fascism. How dare you prevent me from banning that? That's fascist, you pagan. That's basically the whole thing. Everything that he calls any opposition to Christian bigotry is persecution and martyrdom, and therefore is fascism and oppression, right? And I'm not kidding. Like, this is, you could read the last chapter of the book and you go like, holy fuck balls. That's where this guy comes from. And it just shocked me. Like I expected there to be allusions and dog whistles and like for him to not outright say it, but he just fucking outright says these things. And I'm like, oh my God. And yeah, so he's basically shitting on the values that he thinks America is built on, which means that he doesn't even understand what those values are, right? He doesn't understand what freedom of speech is or why it's important. He doesn't understand what freedom of religion is or what is necessary to maintain freedom of religion. There's one thing in the book where he rags on like Bernie Sanders as being a traitorous constitutional violator for suggesting, just asking the question of an appointee for a position in government, asking him like, but you've said that Muslims are inferior and damned. And he basically was, the point being, Sanders' point is like, how can we appoint you to a position that requires you to treat everyone equally when you think that they're inferior and damned? And so, okay, that's a fair point. But what this guy, John Davidson, does is he says, oh my God, that violates the constitutional protection against no religious tests for office. And it's demonic. And how dare he oppress Christians? He's just banning Christians just for being Christians. It's like, no, we're banning people who won't treat others equally, like you.
Right.
so for him, like the idea that we would not want bigots, we don't want bigots who will not treat citizens equally. We don't want them in office. We don't. He treats that as basically a violation of his religion and oppression and persecution and has to be opposed, right? And so that's how he frames everything. All the pagan oppression that he's talking about is all actual enforcement of freedom. And he has a thing, and he goes into it in the book about there was this Christian parade in this one town. And the gay pride group wanted to put a float in that parade. And the Christians said, no, that's against our values. And so they said, okay, we will have a parade down the same street right after yours. Right. And so that seems like a completely reasonable solution, right? This guy, Davidson, he paints this as a villainous outcome of leftist bureaucrats and is the reason Christians should take over government, to prevent gay people from ever having a public display of gay pride, because that is against Christian values and should never be in public. And that's his position, right? So, so the idea, like, for him to like just rampantly shit over all the values that he thinks are so important and come from his own God and his religion is disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah, he sounds like it's like a hyperbolic comedic routine where the person's like, the person sits there is like, no, you have all the freedom. As long as you don't offend me, you have all the freedom to make any decision. Like you want to worship, God however you want to, that's fine. But as long as it's Christian and I approve of it, like it feels like a very hyper, like something that I would hyperbolically like state to highlight, some kind of thing.
Like he's a Poe. Yeah. No, he's not. He's definitely not a Poe. This guy's serious. He believes his own bullshit, for sure.
Yeah. All right, a little bit more in this section where he's talking about his Pagan America thing, and then we're going to get into the pagan wars.
On their own outside of that context, right? Outside of that context, they eventually devolve into a form of post-Christian neo-paganism. And that's the era that we're emerging into today. As we shed our Christian civilization, we're also going to shed those things that we associate with our American way of life that I just enumerated. And the reason is because there's no basis for them outside of a Christian moral cosmology that posits, what human beings are and what their relationship to God is and what their relationship to one another should be. So
yeah, pause there. That's so this comes up in my article on Brierley, and where Justin Brierley talks about the UN Declaration of Human Rights and quotes it, says, "Look at all these Christian ideals in there," and it's like, yeah, but you quote mined it. If you read the whole text, there's nothing there about Christianity. It says why do we need human rights? Why are these rights important? Why is freedom of speech important? Right? Why is freedom of religion important? Why is human dignity important? Well, the UN Declaration explains these. It says almost verbatim. I'm going to paraphrase, but I quote it in my article on Brierley. But it says if we don't do this, if we don't assign everyone these equal rights, shit goes badly, everything gets fucked up, and everyone's miserable, right? It's the idea is it's horrible. Look at what happens when we don't respect these things. Therefore, we should respect them so that we can have a peaceful society, a prosperous society, with less conflict and more cooperation. And it's this is just common sense, evidence-based reasoning. We don't need God to tell us this. We don't need to be made in the image of God to figure this out, right? And so that's why secularism is actually better than Christianity, because it's actually creating a foundation, creating a real foundation that you can see, evidence-based reasoning for these values, whereas Christianity doesn't. The Bible doesn't provide any basis for these values. He's just making shit up, basically. He's just well, I think because of we're made in the image of God, that therefore slavery is wrong. It's if that were true, why does not a single fucking person in the Bible, including Jesus himself, ever say that, right? It clearly wasn't obvious to them, right? So you're just making shit up, basically. That's not a foundation. That's the absence of a foundation. It's just bullshit that you're pulling out of your ass and saying God explains it. And it's that doesn't really explain it at all.
So I feel like I know where he would probably push back against you on that, and that's bringing up the one section of Paul. I can't remember which epistle, but he is basically telling this slave owner to treat his slave, as he would a child, or equally, or something like that. He would probably bring that up. What would you say about that?
Yeah, that's Philemon. But there's nothing there about slavery. This is the important thing that's worth pointing out, is that Philemon is just a personal letter about one specific slave that was helping Paul out. And Paul's trying to mollify the master. The master wants the slave back, and Paul wants to convince him to let Paul keep the slave as an assistant. So as a slave, right? And so he basically is coming up with these rhetorical arguments for why he should allow that to happen. But none of those arguments are slavery is wrong, right? None of those arguments are you should free him. You should in fact, you should manumit all your slaves. No, that's not in Philemon. There's nothing about that. No, you should just let him keep working for me. That's Philemon, right? That's the thing. So yeah, it doesn't really have any of the political understanding of abolition or anything like that. It does have the concept of not treating your slaves like shit. And that's important to point out, because that was also in pagan thought. The Stoic philosophers, Seneca and others, also had the same. Even writers like Tacitus and stuff have commented on some of the things we do to slaves are really fucked up and we shouldn't do them. And so they were aware of this, right? Ideally, you should treat your slaves well. Just treat them well. Now, the concept of what constituted well might vary. For example, in Paul's case, because Christians are so anti-sex, obviously he's going to say, don't use your slaves for sex, which is only accidentally right. It's like a clock that's right, a broken clock that's right twice a day. It's yeah, you're right. You shouldn't rape your slaves. Very good. But the only reason he says that is because sex is bad. not because it's bad to have sex with a slave, right? Because consensual sex with your slave is also bad, right? So it's not just that. But the pagans, though, they had a more freer attitude towards slave rape than Paul did, and that's bad and censurable. But the thing is, you can't really credit Paul or Christians for coming up with the idea that rape is bad, because they really just think sex is bad, and rape is incidental to them. And so when you understand the motivations behind it, it looks less impressive until much later. Like, it's really like the last half of the 20th century that we've actually had an enlightened view of rape as a moral problem. And so we don't see that in the Bible. We don't see that anywhere else.
Yeah. And for anybody wondering, Dr. Joshua Bowen actually has a really great book. Well, two of them. Does the Old Testament condone slavery? I think is the title of the one. And then there's also the Atheist Guidebook to the Atheist Guidebook to the Old Testament, or something along those lines. Yeah, but he covers both of them. And in the second volume of the Atheist Guidebook, he actually goes through and he compares the Old Testament laws to antebellum South laws concerning slavery, and he shows how there's definitely similarities where the antebellum South laws definitely were inspired by the Old Testament ideas of it. And also in the wider ancient Near East, a lot of the civilizations around there, they had actually in some respects, better laws concerning slavery as opposed to
that's true.
Jewish society.
So did Roman society. Like, the Roman slave system was nowhere near as horrific as the antebellum, the American slave system. The Christian slave system was way, way morally worse than the Roman system. The Roman system was still morally bad, but it had plenty of crimes to be accused of. But it was a much more rational and humane system of slavery, relatively speaking, compared to the just abject dehumanization that was literally codified as law in the southern states of America.
Yeah. And we're about to get into the pagan war section, where he's going to be basically rewriting history here because there's a very obvious contradiction, like a special pleading kind of contradiction that occurs in just a very short time span.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could tell exactly what I'm talking about.
I spot multiple things with his rhetoric here. It's interesting as a teaching example, but go on.
Okay.
Why can't just appreciation for civic virtue and love of country and just general morality be enough to stitch together a people?
Well, general morality has to be based on something, a vision of the world, or a vision of what human beings are, right? So pagan morality, and this holds true across vast expanses of time and geography and
stop right there for just a moment. I like how all pagans, all ethnic groups, all other religions are all the same. They just have exactly the same moral systems. They're exactly the same. It's just one thing. It's just pagans. They're all the same and they're all bad. Anyway, that becomes relevant in a moment. You can proceed.
Is that if you are not part of my group, then it's my moral duty to take what you have or subjugate you for the benefit of me and my people, right?
Yeah,
and that's what we see over.
That is not true. That is not. Maybe you could dig and find a rare example of a pagan society that actually had that belief as a teaching, but none of the pagan societies that one would appeal to, like Athens, Rome, these were not their doctrine at all. They didn't have that as their moral system. In fact, that was generally recognized as bad, to the point that they often had to lie about why they were doing it. This is one of the things that one of my advisor at Columbia University is William Harris. He kind of changed the field of the understanding of Roman imperialism. And I remember in high school actually being taught this, that the Romans were just defending themselves and just accidentally ended up with an empire, right? And it's funny, I remember being told this in high school. When I got to Columbia University, I found out that my professor had just written a book refuting that. And that it became, by that point, like the standard view of Roman imperialism, which is that the Romans deliberately arranged that so that they could claim they were just defending themselves as an excuse to conquer an empire. And that this was actually a ongoing policy program of the Senate over multiple generations. And he shows this with extensive documentation proving this. Now, you don't do that if you actually believe what Davidson is saying right here, right? If you actually believe that it's your moral right to just conquer people, then that's what you would say you were doing, right? You just say, well, it's our moral right. They're not us, so we get to have them, right? Like that would be their argument. But no, they have to go through this elaborate ruse to try and create fake claims of self-defense to go conquer other people. That tells you what their moral values really are, right? Their moral values are really against this, so they have to come up with some sort of excuse for it. And so this really illustrates the same point that he's missing here, which is that, and we get to this where where Ryan will challenge him on this, and he'll try to push back. But the idea that like Christians haven't lived up to these ideals at all, right? Like all these ideals he's talking about, Christians have been the worst offenders. And he goes into this thing as well. Our ideals are great. We've fallen short of our ideals. And it's like, but if that's your standard, then that's the same standard that you should apply to the pagans that you're criticizing. You should look at their values and not their actions. Like if they fall short of their values and you say that's okay, it's their values that are important, then you should admit that and say like, well, we're not going to look at what they did. We're going to look at what they claimed was the right thing to do. Like what were their values? How did they ground them and stuff like that? If you apply the same standard to pagans as to Christians, you get completely different results in this guy. In fact, Christians look worse than the pagans by that metric. The pagan ideals are better actually than the Christian ideals. So that might come out more as we proceed.
Yeah, it definitely does.
Over and over again throughout history, the history of pagan peoples and cultures.
Right. So let me ask about, so we've been a Christian nation for a couple hundred years.
Mm-hmm.
We have launched more wars than any other nation, maybe in history. Like in the 200 plus years that we've been a country,
we've done some subjugating.
We've done some subjugating. There have been only a few years out of all.
Just a little bit of subjugating. Just a little bit.
I am so glad that he made this argument. Like he does it pretty well. But yeah, let him continue.
All of those years, even during our isolation, quote unquote, isolationist period while we're enacting a genocide, that we were not at war with other people and subjugating them. So either it's not true that Christianity allows us in a meaningful way to see others as equals and treat them as we would like to be treated, or we are just overriding that as an impulse. Like,
well,
when is this Christianity going to kick in?
Well, I wouldn't.
I love the way he puts it. When is this Christianity going to kick in?
When is it going to kick into hyperdrive here? Huh?
It's worth pointing out to the audience that Ryan is coming at this cold. He didn't read the book, so he has no idea what is going to be confronted with. He was just now at this moment confronted with this, and this is his immediate go-to as a reply. And I have to say, like, it's a good reply. Even having read the book, this is a really solid reply because it challenges the idea of, well, let's just treat Christianity as like a cure. It demonstrably doesn't work, so why are you selling it? Right? Like you're talking about, but our values are great. I was like, yeah, but it doesn't work, right? It's not inculcating the values. No one's following the values. So this is the flip side of the point I just made before, is that if you're going to judge things, you really do have to judge them by their outcomes. So if you're going to complain about pagans being violent, then you have to apply the same standard to Christians. But if Christians are just as violent as pagans, clearly Christianity is no solution, right? It doesn't solve anything. So why advocate it? Whereas if you look at the history of secularism and secular humanism, no wars there. There's no secular humanist wars, right? There's no secular humanist genocides. So it's like, I don't know, like all of these good things seem to be coming out of evidence-based reasoning and not Christianity. And so anyway, so this point about consequent, like actual outcomes matters. And it's important to note how he tries to deflect this argument, as we'll see in a moment.
Yeah, and this part right here really had me. This last section and the section before had me really questioning like his whole concept of history, because, I mean, wasn't it like the Christians that sent people out to like force others to join Christianity?
Yeah.
Or like kill them, like genocide them, like slaughter them.
Yeah, and using lots of different forms of coercion. So in the Middle Ages, Christianity grew by doing things like, for example, you would go to a king and threaten an invasion of his land unless he converts to Christianity, knowing that king would then force all of his subjects to convert to Christianity. Right? So like they say, yeah, but all the people voluntarily just loved their king and his religion. And it's like, that's not really what happened just now. Right? Like, yeah, no one went in and like slit throats, but it's still coercion, right? It's not a free adoption of Christianity. It's political and manipulation. It's threat of force, etc. So yeah, when you look at the actual history, like the nitty gritty of what actually happened, it looks way gross and disgusting compared to this enlightened like idea, like, oh, Christianity was just beautiful and wonderful and everybody just loved it. That's not what happened, really. But yeah, you're right.
I want to be careful we don't mistake an ideal for history is contingent, and we're never going to attain the ideal of like human equality, right? Or a perfect realization of Christian moral ideals. The United States didn't do it. European civilization didn't do it. I don't think anyone's ever going to get it, right? But that doesn't negate the fundamental sort of philosophical and moral claims of Christianity, right? Christianity, as opposed to many other moral and religious systems, does claim an equality between people, and that's where we get things like human rights, the basis for human rights and human dignity.
So why can't you take it out? So like in a post-Christian America, why can't you say we like the ideas that came from Christianity?
Golden rules, golden.
We're taking the Christ out of it, and like we just
Christless Christianity.
Yeah, right there. Yeah. Her remark was very good too, right? Is the idea like, well, if these things are good, if they should be defensible, you don't need God to defend them, right? You shouldn't need to appeal to God if they're good, right? If they're good, you should be able to demonstrate that, right? Like, look, they're good. That's what the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights does. Is like, look, societies that respect human rights end up better. Isn't that astonishing? As like nations that treat each other this way end up better off. They're more prosperous, more peaceful, less destruction, less misery, etc. So there's actually like really good evidence-based arguments for these values. You don't need the religion, even if the religion had come up with them, and it did not. This is the other point. It's not in the Gospels. It's not in the Old Testament. None of this stuff is there. It's all pagan. It was reinterjected into Christianity by Renaissance philosophers reading pagan texts and recovering and resurrecting these pagan ideas and trying to basically rewash Christianity with paganism. And that led to the Enlightenment, etc. And that's how we got here. And so that's the actual history of events. But this guy's got this completely twisted idea of events. But they're pushing back on the consequences, the effects, the outcome point. That was clearly a threat. That was a belief threat, because he's going to come up with an argument against it. And his first argument is, well, we fell short of our ideals. But of course, as soon as he does that, he's given up his entire argument, because now he's adopting a standard by which he can no longer condemn pagans, because pagans did the same thing. They had high values, didn't live up to them. So that's the thing. But he had to retreat there, because he had to do that, because there's no way he could deny reality. So he had to do that. But then he's going to do this other thing that's coming next. I don't know if you have it running as it's going to happen, but
oh, probably. I left most of the video in. I just cut out some of the more superfluous, I guess, conversation.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's still about 2 minutes left in this section.
In other words, or a secular humanism, right? This is the argument, that Steven Pinker or Richard Dawkins would make, right? They want the culture without the cults, but you can't have the culture without the cults, because the culture relies on the religion and the religious claims as the source of its vitality, the source of its coherence, right? Why should a people who are post-Christian retain Christian moral virtues, right? Why should I think that?
So why do people like him ask that question, but never check to find out the reason? Right? Like, it's not like we haven't written about this since David Hume, right? Like we've answered this question. Like it's hugely answered. You could find tons of answers. You could really explore deeply how we've answered this question. he's completely oblivious. You'll never find anywhere in his book any acknowledgement of any philosopher who grounds these moral values in their moral system. He only talks about nihilists, basically, philosophers he doesn't like. There were usually fringe philosophers like Marquis de Sade, who no one took seriously. Like, that's not even a significant philosopher in Western thought. But he spends pages on that guy. But he does not a single mention of Hume. Hume's name comes up in a quote idly. He never discusses David Hume or anything like that. He never discusses Anscombe. He never discusses anyone else you could think of that's important, Philippa Foot, or any of the other important philosophers in Western history, or not even Rousseau, not even Bentham, right? Like, he's like not even like these foundational philosophers of modern value systems. Kant, he doesn't even discuss Kant, really. Or how Kant grounded it. Kant grounded it in reason and evidence. He didn't appeal to God. And, so that's the thing, is like, I just find this astonishing that he just says this. Oh, can't be, but they can't answer this question. Why would we believe these things if there's no God? It's like, but we've answered this question, Davidson. For hundreds of years, we've been answering this question. Why don't you know that? Why don't they check? And that's the point that I find that happens a lot, is that you see these apocalyptic moralists have this moral panic, and they go looking for the enemy, but they never go looking for like the steel man. They never go looking for like, well, it's never genuinely curious, like how do atheists justify their moral reasoning? Like, I should go find out. Maybe I should go talk to some atheists, and not just one atheist who's a cantankerous crank. I should talk to like a variety of atheists to get a view, right? I should look at what are the most popular books on this subject, showing the influence of those books, and not some fringe weirdo like Marquis de Sade that no one reads, right? Like, this is the kind of thing that is methodological. It comes down to the epistemology of this guy's point of view, and it is a fundamentally broken epistemology. It is incapable of discovering things that are false, and consequently, he's riddled with false beliefs, and that is the consequence of having a bad epistemology.
Yeah. Also, another thing that kind of gets me, because it comes up here in the fifth segment, but this whole idea of a Christless Christianity, as if Christ said anything on the topics that he covered as far as characterizing
right.
the Constitution. Because my first go-to is, can you please point out where Jesus said everybody is equal? Because I don't remember a single, like, even if you were to take the gospel,
where's the freedom of speech? Like, where's the sermon on freedoms? Right. The sermon on human rights? It's not in there. It reminded me of something just now then, that comes to the contradiction between him saying these values are great, and then he shits all over them when he has a policy recommendation. So what I found in the book, one thing that was like, so when I watched the video, and if you just watch the video as is, you're just weirded out. Like, why is he using the word pagan this way? This is weird. Like, why is this some sort of just panic language? Like, did he just come up with this as a gimmick? Like, what's going on? When you read the book, he got it from T.S. Eliot, because T.S. Eliot did this series of lectures. T.S. Eliot was a Christian nationalist, right? But he was kind of a weirdo Christian nationalist, in that he was ultra liberal. And I mean in the progressive sense, not the utilitarian Adam Smith sense, but I mean like in a legitimate progressive liberal sense. T.S. Eliot's idea of Christian, so what he said is like, we're either going to be Christian or we're going to be pagan. So T.S. Eliot created this sort of poetic, let's say, allegorical use of the word pagan, which is that we would go back to idolizing money and things like that. And so he gets all that from T.S. Eliot, and this is like, I want to say the 1940s. I can't remember exactly. Maybe it's 20s or 40s. It's early 20th century. And so I was surprised by this. And so I went and read the T.S. Eliot thing that he quoted. And it was really funny what he left out of the quotes, because T.S. Eliot goes on, like he basically says this. He says, we need to found our civilization on Christian values. We need to completely reconceptualize our civilization. This is 20th century guy speaking. Completely reconceptualize, completely reorganize our system and make it based on Christian thought. Okay, what does that look like for T.S. Eliot? Well, no capitalism, no profit motive, no industrialization, no cities. His idea is that everybody should be treated equally. Everybody should have equal access to resources. We should care more about the environment. This is a really important one because Eliot goes on and on about the crucial importance of how we're destroying our environment. The environment is really precious, and so Christianity should invoke the idea that we really should care about the environment, take care of it, and not exploit it. Davidson has a whole section. He's a climate science denier. He has a whole thing about environmentalism is demonic and evil and has to be opposed. So he's anti-environmentalist, but he got this idea from Eliot, who's an environmentalist. And so this idea that Eliot has this, Eliot's view of Christianity of a Christian society is the exact opposite of his. His view of society is literally a communitarian, just society where there is no capitalism. There's everybody's labor is not exploited. It is actually celebrated. Like you have environment is actually taken care of. We're not raping the earth. We're not pursuing profits. We're pursuing human good, and the human good that is shared with everyone equally, etc. In other words, Jesus-y stuff, right? So it reminded me when I was reading that, I was like, oh my God, this is the whole article on Christians worshiping the Antichrist, right? Modern Christians, like this guy, are actually worshiping the Antichrist because all their values are the exact opposite of things that Jesus preaches. Like, Jesus is a communist, right? Like he actually goes into detail about, and a pacifist, incidentally. So a pacifist, communist, about you treat your immigrants well, like don't judge people. It's not your business. God will judge them. Leave it to him. That kind of stuff. There's a lot of these ideas about how you're supposed to be that are the exact opposite of what ultra conservatives like him want. So when he gets into this idea of having this oppressive society where we're going to take charge of everything and forbid everything that we don't like, I literally ban it and literally have this draconian system. Oh, he has this description of parenthood that is horrific, where you're supposed to isolate children and prevent them from having access to any information other than what you provide them. And you're supposed to run your household like a monastery. He uses that word, monastery. You should run your kids should live like monks in a monastery, and they should not have access to any outside information. That's his system of thought. T.S. Eliot would be like, oh my God, no, that's exactly what I'm saying you shouldn't do. And so it's this kind of like massive self-contradiction in their worldview. And then quote mining T.S. Eliot too, which is kind of embarrassing. T.S. Eliot literally argued entirely against this guy's book 100 years before the book was written, which is really impressive psychic powers by T.S. Eliot.
Okay. You ready to continue?
Yeah, let's do it.
That all men are created equal, when clearly, in many ways, people are not equal. We see inequality all around us, and why shouldn't we adopt a pagan morality that says, inequality? And this is, the ancient Aristotle said this. The ancient pagans, they understood inequality means that some people are naturally slaves and some people are naturally
because
rulers.
Aristotle said it. All pagans said it. All pagans, even Chinese, apparently. Right. Even the Native Americans, right? Like everybody said it. Aristotle said it. Therefore, all pagans agree with Aristotle. Okay, yeah, let him continue.
And if you're poor, that fate has decided that you should be poor, and that's your lot. Christianity, brought a moral revolution to this pagan morality and this pagan cosmology, and posited a radically new way of understanding the world and our relations. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. He said this a couple of times. He said moral cosmology and now pagan cosmology, but he's not actually talking about cosmology, is he? Like,
yes,
I would,
he literally
is. Okay.
I mean, even apart from the fact that he's probably talking about demons, let's pretend that he's not. What he means is Christian cosmology means the organization of the universe and its construction. So God exists. He's part of the cosmology. God has created certain things like heaven and hell and stuff. That's part of the cosmology. And all of this cosmology entails a morality. That's his ultra-conservative Christian worldview. And so his idea is that pagans have a different cosmology where there's no God and where money is important. Money is in place of God, or sexual freedom or something, right? There's other things that are in place of God, but based on materialism and based on this understanding of how the universe is organized, it's godless. It's just atoms, etc. Like so cosmology entails morality is his position, which is true trivially, and significantly, I would still say as well. It's just that he gets what he means by paganism is secular thought. He gets secular thought all wrong. Like he knows nothing about it. He has no conception of how secular humanists derive moral facts from cosmological facts or physical facts, facts of nature. But anyway, so yeah, that's when he's talking cosmology, he does mean it. He means cosmology. He means like worldview or material order, like what exists and what does that entail about how we should behave.
Okay. I was confused by him saying cosmology because I guess in my head, like the cosmology of the early Jewish thought, I don't exactly necessarily connect that to like the moral arguments and everything like that. Like those seem like two different things, but I can totally see how he would consider them to be both of the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any objective sense, but it makes sense from within his worldview.
Yeah.
And it launched a radical shift in human civilizations that had never before been seen. And so America is one expression of that, right? And I mean, we can have different interpretations of American history. European civilization is, of course, where we came from. But we're entering, and this is what the book argues, we're entering this new sort of unprecedented era, a post-Christian era.
So
and
pause
my
there
argument
for a moment.
is we should not...
I do want to challenge his claim that there was something was radical. And Ryan will push back on this indirectly later in the video. This idea that Christianity made radical changes to society. All the changes he's referring to are changes that have happened in like the last 200 years. So Christianity was sitting around humming for 1,000 years and made none of these changes. So, and then when you look at like the history of their development, they're painfully slow. Centuries and centuries of slow, gradual change and enlightenment over centuries and centuries. There's no radical break. There's at no point in human history did Christianity make any radical difference to civilization. Any difference you could claim it made, it took excruciatingly long centuries of extremely gradual development, which is the opposite of radical, right? So, and to give you an illustration of this, it'll come up. I think he brings it up later. Maybe it's just one throwaway sentence. I can't remember, but he talks about the non-combatants. So the idea, the laws of war, like just war. Now he uses just war theory in the wrong sense, because that's a huge category that envelops a massive number of claims, and he treats it like it's all one thing, but that's not the case. But what he talks about is the idea that it is wrong to kill unarmed civilians. So, no one told this to Israel lately, but apart from that, this idea that it's wrong to do that you should only, like in a war, you should only be killing armed combatants and leaving civilians alone, right? That's high ideal. That's supposed to be this radical break that Christianity came up with. And he mentions it in the book, and he talks about it there a little bit more, but it doesn't really differ much from what he says in the video. But the thing is that when you look at the history of this, it's excruciatingly slow and long, and it doesn't happen the way that he explains. Like, it didn't happen that, image of God, therefore we shouldn't kill civilians. Radical change in society. No. It took centuries and 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 centuries. And then eventually someone said, you know what? It's a bad idea to kill peasants because we need them when we conquer the land. Don't kill the peasants. They gotta, the serfs are slaves of the land. So like their property, don't destroy the property that you're conquering, right? It's like, no, that's not a high-minded value at all. That is totally selfish. And it's what you see, like this he refers to like these Christian attempts at war legislation, but they'll list serfs along with olive trees and animals, right? Like, don't cut down olive trees or kill the animals because it's fucking property, motherfucker. It has nothing to do with the image of God. It has nothing to do with human dignity. It has nothing to do with morality. That's how these war principles occurred. And then they got more expansive, like don't kill merchants because we need merchants, right? Why are merchants special? Don't kill priests because, they have privilege, right? Like we don't want our people killed, so stop killing our priests. So it's these very selfish motives. They're not high-minded motives at all. The first time we ever get like a successful war legislation is under Abraham Lincoln, actually. Like he created these doctrines that evolved into modern just war theory. So anyway, this is important. The Abraham Lincoln system, and I think he even references it in the book, how it led to the modern UN principles of war, etc. Well, I read them. I went and read these actual doctrines of war that Abraham Lincoln disseminated, and there's nothing in there about not killing unarmed civilians. In fact, there's excuses to kill them are in the principles, like, right? So, but there's no explicit saying don't do that. It's not there yet. We don't get to that high-minded idea until the 20th century. And it comes out of the United Nations logic, which is all evidence-based. It's all like, you know what? It starts with POWs, right? So it's the idea like, you know what? If we don't, and this is in the Abraham Lincoln, so this is what he started, is if we don't torture and treat horribly our POWs or their POWs that we've captured, then they won't torture and treat badly our POWs. So it's just an agreement. It's like a game theory agreement. It's like, look, we will treat your POWs cool if you treat our POWs cool. Are we cool? Like, that's it, right? It's a very like logical game theoretic principle. It's not based on the Bible. It doesn't come from Christianity or anything like that. And that evolved into like, okay, we'll treat your civilians cool if you treat our civilians cool. Are we cool? Right? It's all this idea of developing like contract theory, the social contract theory. It doesn't come out of Christianity at all. It doesn't come from the image of God. None of that is the foundation of stuff. But this is a really long slog. Like, it took literally many, many centuries of very slow development for us to get to that point. So there was no radical, like the Christianity didn't come along and radically change how we think about war. It did not. And when you look at like the early war theorists, like Augustine of Hippo, the great Saint Augustine, he's like justifying killing of civilians and things like that, right? Like his idea of like what is wrong in war is basically the same thing that pagans believed, is that like you shouldn't just randomly kill civilians for no reason, right? Yeah, like pagans agreed with that too. Like everybody agrees with that. That's bad. People do it all the time, but we don't like it. It's not good. And so, but that's not radical. There's nothing radical about that. So anyway, that's a thing that's relevant, that he just doesn't do history well. Like he doesn't talk about long change, gradual change, like how things evolve over time. Like, no, it's a radical break. Christianity just radically changed everything just instantly somewhere. At some point in history, he won't say when. But anyway, that's what's going on here. It's important to catch that, because this is a huge disrespect of history as a field and its importance. And I really irks me to see people just gloss over the complexity and reality of history in trying to explain things.
Yeah. It feels a lot like it's a very common apologist tactic, cherry picking, because it seems like he's just cherry picking the facts that he wants to use and support whatever he's trying to sell. And so he comes off as looking informed on the topic because he's throwing out all these references and everything like that. But he's really just specially
good point. Good point. Yeah. Aristotle, right? It says Aristotle. So yeah, but like Aristotle's view of slavery was abandoned within like 200 years, right? Like the whole idea of slavery was completely radically different after him. Not radically, I don't want to use that word. It was eventually, like it took time. But the Epicureans did not agree with Aristotle on the idea of slavery. They saw all humans as equals and slavery as an unjust condition. The Stoics, their idea of slavery was no one is naturally a slave. So contrary to Aristotle, no one is naturally a slave. Mind you, Augustine did think, and Thomas Aquinas also thought that people could naturally be slaves, because there's just certain people that just deserve to be subjugated because they're inferior intelligence and inferior judgment. They should just be enslaved. It's natural state of things. But no, both of them, all of them agreed that there were unnatural slaves as well. There are people who shouldn't have been slaves, but were slaves anyway because of sequences of events. And that's how you get penal slavery. Okay, God likes penal slavery. Slavery is cool as long as it's penal slavery. That's still slavery. FYI, we still have that slavery in America. It is explicitly legal in the Constitution. We still have slaves who are being literally bought and sold by corporations, actual slaves being bought and sold by corporations in the prison system in America today. That's happening now as we live and breathe. So there's another huge failure on the system. But the thing is that the Stoics and the Epicureans, so the Epicureans were kind of like the hippies, more on the hippie side of things. They're kind of like the liberals of ancient Rome. And the Stoics were the conservatives. And the Stoicism, or the Stoic philosophy, was the most dominant in the Roman elite. So it was the most influential into Roman law, most influential in Roman government, and things like that. And because it went through the Cicero himself wasn't a Stoic, but he was really illustrated Stoic principles in his writings, and Seneca was a famous Stoic philosopher, and he was very foundational, etc. So Stoicism became the foundation of slavery under the Romans, and their view was that everyone was equal in terms of their capacities and abilities. Slavery was an unnatural condition that just we can make excuses for, like, again, penal slavery or happenstance, bad luck, right? Like these kinds of things. And also this led to the idea that we should treat our slaves better than we do. Again, the conflict between values and reality was the same among pagans as it has been among Christians.
Yeah. And I totally agree that the private prison systems that we have today are pretty disgusting as far as like turning that entire trade basically into like a capitalist sort of money-making machine. I think is just
right
gross.
Based on human capital. Yeah. Yeah, it is shocking.
All right, let's see what else.
Let's continue.
Yeah, we've got a little bit left in this segment, then we're going to jump to something else.
Expect the Christian cosmology, the Christian moral virtues that organized the West for all these centuries to remain intact, cut off from the source of their vitality, right?
I just want to point out that the Christian, structures or whatever that he's talking about here included slavery for hundreds of years.
Yeah, I think, do they get into that in this video? I can't remember.
They do talk about slavery.
Yeah, that comes up. But what this also made me think about right here is this idea. So could you go back and have him say what he just said right now again?
Yeah. Let's see. Let's go back maybe 10 seconds.
Yeah, let's see that.
Organized the West for all these centuries to remain intact, cut off from the source of their vitality, right? And we should expect something new. And the new thing we should expect is a resurgence of this pagan mentality, the pagan ethos, which is one that's based on force and coercion.
Yeah, stop right there. So that was so first of all, I've mentioned the fact that his entire policy solution is force and coercion. So he's actually advocating the thing that he thinks is evil. Is his idea. His whole solution to pagan use of force and coercion is Christian use of force and coercion. So anyway, that's like, he doesn't really believe the things that he's saying. The other thing is, like, he talks about this idea of how we're going to preserve these values. So, like, and he mentions these values, these highfalutin values of freedom of speech and consent of the governed and things like that. He doesn't really care about any of those things, really, but he lists those things. But when you read his book, his concerns are very different. I would say about half the book is sex. He's really bothered by gay people. He's really bothered by scantily clad women. He's really bothered by the transgender thing, the movement, the fact that someone could be trans. Like he's bothered by this. He's bothered by gay people in tight shorts. He's bothered by abortion. Like, oh my God, how you dare let people have sex and get away with it? Like it's a lot of it is sex. So when he says, like, these Christian values that we have to preserve, now he says, like in this video, he says freedom of speech and all that stuff, but he never means that. Like, he's never referring to that. There's no example of that, really. He means sexual morals. We need to get rid of gay people. We need to stop trans identities. We need to stop abortion. We need to, like, force people to either be married or celibate. That's almost a direct quote from the book. And so it's really about that. So when he says Christian values, he really means these sort of toxic, primitive, like irrational values, not these highfalutin values that he means, like freedom of speech. Like he doesn't really mean freedom of speech at all. He doesn't think that's important. That's not, it doesn't come up in his book. It's not relevant, other than when he can suppress it, then it's relevant. There's one other example where he complains about, he has this whole section complaining about Twitter and the Twitter files. You know the Twitter files thing? So he has this whole section about how the Twitter files exposed Pagan America, but he never like identifies an example of any actual thing that he objects to, right? So he sees, so the government is censoring what we can hear. It's like, were they really? And if they were, which thing? Because you want to censor things. So were they censoring things that you would agree that we should censor, or were they censoring other things? Which things? Honestly,
Right.
like fill me in. But no, he doesn't really have any concrete idea of any actual violation of freedom of speech that comes up. So that's not really an issue for him. It's sex mostly. He has a big thing about euthanasia. He's obsessed with that, even though it's a really minor problem. Like it's a really minor issue. It's not like some big societal epidemic of euthanasia. He doesn't want that to be legal, and so he has a lot of shit about that. He really doesn't like social media. He can never really specifically identify what he doesn't like about social media. He just really doesn't like it. And his whole chapter on AI is bonkers. Like I couldn't even make sense of why he thinks AI is demons and why he thinks AI is a problem. He cherry picks these weird fringe examples of these lunatics saying things about AI and says, look, they're turning AI into gods. So it's things like that. Like when he says Christian values, his real concerns are these weird fringe things and not the highfalutin values that he said to these two hosts, right? So he's playing a shell game with, you love these things. Look, the glowing halo of these wonderful things. But we need Christianity to defend this other stuff. It's completely unrelated other stuff that's really important. But you love these glowing haloed things, right? But they're somehow connected. But I'm not going to talk about how or even explain how they're connected. But they are, trust me. We need Christianity, right? And so when you look at what his real concerns are, then it makes more sense. He says, like, well, we need Christianity to justify outlawing gay people. It's like, that's true, right? Like if you get rid of the Christian worldview, then you no longer have any justification for hating on gays. Yeah, that's honest. That's where we're at, bro. So anyway, that's what I think is when you read the book and you really see, like, look at what is he really worried about. Then his whole thing about we need Christianity to preserve this makes sense internally from his point of view. But when you're looking at this video, it doesn't make any sense because all he mentions are these highfalutin values that he just wants to shit on. And so there's this disconnect. But that disconnect is dissolved when you read the book and see that he's really concerned about these other things that make more sense as you need Christianity to defend them. And that's more like the Plato's Republic concept, is that you have to have a false myth and you have to kill people who would deny the myth or change the myth or question the myth. You would basically, well, you're supposed to rendition them first and torture them until they agree. And if they still don't agree, then they're too belligerent. You have to kill them. This is in Plato's Republic. And so you have to have these myths to make people be moral in a particular, obscure, specific way. And so he's adopting that principle, is that we have to make people believe this myth in order to justify these bizarre sexual mores that I want to enforce. And that's literally true. It's just that everything about that is false. Like the morals are bogus. The myth is fake, right? So it's when you see it that way, it's almost tragic how this guy is trapped in this sort of false worldview, thinking that he has to destroy human happiness and liberty and all of these things in order to protect these weird ancient taboos, essentially, about the human body.
Yeah, and what I've heard from a lot of like very traditional Christians out there is that pretty much anything that takes away attention away from God, would be considered demonic or like an idol kind of thing. So that's what I feel like. That's probably how he views social media.
Absolutely, absolutely. You'll get that sense all throughout his book. Like he pegs everything that way. The social gospel, DEI, like just you pick anything, like just anything, Bernie Sanders, socialism, like it's all taking away attention from God, and attention to God is more important apparently than creating a moral society in any real sense. To him, a moral society is a sexually repressed society. That's his idea of a moral society.
Yeah. All right. So this next section, I believe I have labeled, when does Christianity start kicking in? Because the liberal on the,
I'm still trying to figure out.
Crap. Sorry. The liberal on the host panel there
Ryan.
is still not Ryan. Yeah. He's still not satisfied with the stuff that he's laying down.
And again, I'll remind people, like, Ryan is at this cult, like he's just sat down and this just happened like just now, and so he's like trying to come up with something intelligent to say, and like he's doing really well, like on the fly like this. Like this is a bit of an on the spot for him, but yeah.
Okay.
But I guess I'm still trying to figure out, like I was saying earlier, when does the Christianity kick in? Like if the country's founded on these Christian ideals, and the country had Christians supporting slavery, Christians supporting the ethnic cleansing of Native Americans, Christians supporting the Spanish-American War,
these were departures. I think these are departures from Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, let's.
I mean, these are departures from claims of Christianity, right?
It's sort of like true communism has never been tried.
Well,
people mock.
Is it really a departure from Christian? I mean, if you look at Christian history, I mean, I feel like it's pretty much on the nose for Christian history. It's not a like. I don't think it's departing. Also, am I mistaken in, because I've taken the way that he kind of dances around this, I've taken this as being a bit contradictory, because he seems to want to paint pagans in this all-encompassing light where he broad brushes them with, misinformation.
I think we're about to see him do the thing that I was mentioning earlier, where he's going to cherry pick to deflect. Yeah. It's beautiful to see in a sad way. But yeah, what you said there, like, it is true that what he's doing is that he will jump from Christian perspectives that he denigrates and hates when it's convenient for him to represent that as Christianity. So, for example, Quaker pacifism, Anabaptists who are against these wars, right? The abolitionist sects, the Unitarians, for example. Like he will hold them up as examples of how great Christianity is. But he fucking hates those Christians. He hates them. And so, like, that's the Christianity that he declared to be pagan, right? Like, these are pagans that he's holding up as Christians. But when you look at, like, Christians who are closer to him, who actually have the ideas that he has about how to organize society, how to control society, what we have to do, when you look at, like, policy, the Christians that he's aligned with are the very Christians who supported slavery, who fought literally to the death for slavery, who supported the Spanish-American War and the domination of the Philippines and the genocide of Native Americans. Like those are his people. Those are the Christians that he wants to be. But so like when Ryan points that out, like he deflects by no, that was a failure of Christian ideals. It's like, yeah, a failure of the Christian ideals that you call pagan because you hate those Christian sects that actually are against those things. You are actually defending the Christian sects that supported those things. And that is Ryan's point. So he's deflecting that with this shell game about who gets to be called a Christian and a pagan whenever it's convenient for him, right? And making this argument. And it's really important to catch when that happens, when these kind of Christian nationalists pull these arguments, is that like they have a particular version of Christianity that they think is the only true one. But then they will use these false Christianities that they condemn as examples of how great Christianity is, to sort of gateway you into their like Christian nationalist bullshit. So it's important to call them out when they pull that stunt, essentially. And that's a stunt he just pulled here. It's not very obvious that he did it, but it's what he just did, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Fuck that idea when actual communists will say,
when's the communism going to kick in?
Yeah, when's the communism? Like you say, well, the Soviet Union wasn't great, Cuba wasn't great. Well, then that wasn't real communism. But Christianity,
what I'm saying,
yeah, pause right there. That was a great argument. I just loved that analogy. I was like, oh man, he just came up with that on the fly, and it's like fucking spot on. It's like, yeah, you sound like communists, dude. Like, yeah, but communism, like the ideals are great, man, but yeah, it fails all the time and never works. But the values, man. So the criticism, it's the same point, right? That he's trying to get this guy to acknowledge that this is a problem with his point of view. Now, there are legitimate responses to this argument, right? Like, he could have pointed out, like, well, there's a legitimate way in which there is for example, no communist country that has ever existed has ever implemented the communism that Karl Marx himself actually suggested, right? So that is true. No one has done that. And then, of course, you have the fact that communism is not the same thing as socialism. Turns out socialism is actually kind of cool and actually works really well, etc. Like, what do you mean by communism? Are you talking about Maoism, Stalinism, Leninism? These aren't even the same things, much less Marxism. And then what you call it isn't necessarily what it is. So, like, there's a complexity here that he could have responded and said, actually, it might be true that there's some valid communist principles. By the way, let me discuss Jesus in the book of Acts, Acts 4, how it talks about like a legitimate way to organize society in a communist way. It would totally work. It would be totally Christian. By the way, T.S. Eliot actually argued this, which he could do because T.S. Eliot did. And so, like, there would be a legitimate way to respond to this communist analogy. But he can't do it because he knows he's anti-communist. He's a fucking ultra-conservative. So this Davidson can't do that. Like, he can't do that. He can't say Jesus was a communist. He can't take that point of view. So anyway, I just found that funny. But anyway, so he says this, but watch what happens. Watch what the response is.
Communism only had like a 200-year run. Christianity's had 2,000 years.
Right. And well, I mean, I don't know about you, but I think that Christianity has produced the greatest civilization the world's ever seen, right?
Which one's that?
The one that we're sitting in right now.
Which one would that be?
Nice Snyder mark. Davidson just rolls right past it. He doesn't really respond to it. But his point, like, about the 2,000 years and the 200 years and the 2,000 years is like, that's a long time to fail, right? Like, this is a failed ideology. I just found that funny. But anyway, so yeah, so let him continue. Let's see what happens.
Right.
But certainly a fairer and juster world than we've seen before.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Right. I mean, consider something like, the Roman Empire.
Okay,
right?
Good. Yeah, pause that right there.
We have a tendency.
Before he gets into the Roman Empire, which her point right there, like, she's trying to help him out. She's throwing him a softball there. It's this idea like because when he said, like, the greatest civilization, I immediately thought, like, what are you talking about? Like, jet aircraft? Like, what, are you referring to science? Are you referring to technology? Are you referring to democracy? Are you referring to, well, what exactly? Like, the absence of world wars in the 20th century? Can't be doing that. What do you mean by the greatest civilization? What is he referring to? So this is one of those platitudes. It's like, make America great again. There's no cognitive content to that statement. Like, what do you even mean by great? Like, what are you talking about? Like, you just saying America is great and awesome. How dare you question it? It's like, what's great about America? And I'm not saying that there isn't anything great about America. I'm just asking you to tell me what you think is great about America. Like, articulate. What are you talking about? And so she sort of prods him by throwing him the ball of saying, oh, let's say moral values. It's more fair and just, right? It's like, that's what makes it the greatest civilization. I'm not sure that's what he actually meant when he said that. I think he meant, look at our massive aircraft carrier groups. Aren't we a fucking great civilization, right? Like, I think he's talking about what is actually great, which is like our amazing technological feats, our extraordinarily undefeatable military, our, all of this things that are, materially great. But she says, oh, more just and fair. Well, okay, now if you're talking about just and fair, like, which justice, when, like, and how did that come about? Because there's no moment in history where suddenly we became just, right? Like, suddenly civilization is fair now. Like, it just happened. Everything is fair. No, there's like a million little ways that society is unjust and unfair. And every one of those little dials gets moved a little bit in different ways and for over long periods of time and stuff. Like, there's no blanket way to say that we are just more fair and just now. Like, it's true that we are, but in what ways and how did we get there? And why haven't we gotten further? What's been holding us back? Why did it take us 2,000 years, et cetera, et cetera? Why did we make so much progress in the last 200 years? Right? Like, Like we've made like 100 times more progress in the last 200 years than in the previous 1,000 in terms of moral philosophy and the morality of society and just war principles and all of these things. Why has it only happened in just after we abandoned Christianity as the organizing principle of society, just when we decided to base our values and everything on evidence-based reasoning? Only then, in just a mere 2 centuries, we have women's rights, women have the vote, slavery is abolished. Like you can just go down the list. Like, why did that all happen in that short period of time? Only when that happened. But when Christianity was running the show full run, literally just owned it. For 2,000 years, they didn't do it, right? Like they didn't do any of this. You could say 1,500. I'll give them 1,500 years still.
Rick, that's a departure from Christianity. You can't judge Christianity on its entire history like that. You can only judge it on the last couple hundred years, really just the last 100 years when, you know, all of this stuff was really what he would consider to be part. Yeah. Quit being unfair, Rick. Damn.
All right, he's going to get to this cherry picking fallacy that I just love, but let's see it happen.
All right.
I guess since the Enlightenment to sort of romanticize the pagan past and in the Roman world and the Greek world, those are slave societies. Most people in the Roman Empire were slaves. They didn't have anything like rights, right? If you were a Roman citizen or a Roman aristocrat, you could do whatever you wanted to people who were in a lower station than you. You could rape them, you could murder them, you could discard them, and it wasn't seen, so far from not being any kind of moral censure. It was like a mark of your rank that you were able to do this. This is true all through pagan societies, as I said, across time and cultures.
Yeah, that's somewhat untrue. I want to point out that Roman law had a lot more regulation of slavery than American slavery did. So there slaves did have rights. There was the right to the peculium. There was a right to manumission, and you actually couldn't just kill slaves randomly. And so there were some limitations, but you know, obviously the limitations were not that great, right? So there's a lot of things that you could rape your slaves. You could probably get away with killing your slaves. You could treat them horribly and things like that. They weren't great protections for slaves, but that's because slavery sucks in general. But when you get to American slavery, Christian slavery, they got rid of even the Roman protections that the rights that they gave to slaves. Even those were gotten rid of. So Christian slavery was worse than that, and it's worth pointing that out.
Yeah. So now they're going to start talking about the treatment of indigenous people. So basically following along with the whole idea of slavery and everything like that. They're pretty much challenging John Davidson here on this whole idea of Christianity being for everybody and like supporting equality and all this stuff.
I mentioned to people he has sections in his book about the treatment of indigenous peoples and things like that. They're not well written. They're not well researched. They're polemical and you know, ideological and so on. But he does talk about those things more in the book than he will here.
One of the grossest Christian arguments in favor of slavery in the United States was these are not people. And what's interesting about that is because, you know, as soon as you acknowledge these are human beings and you're a Christian, you have to treat them equally as human beings.
Right, which was the abolitionist argument, right?
Well, I was going to say, if you could talk, because that's in the book, about how Christians get blamed for perpetrating slavery. I think rightfully there was a Christian argument that was made in favor of slavery. It's a Christian argument that's made in front of awful imperialism and, to your point, ethnic cleansing. But if you go to, if you talk about what happened when Columbus arrived, it was Bartolome de las Casas that was saying this is awful from a Christian perspective. Yeah.
So the debates over, you know, what should the proper disposition of Christian Europeans be toward the indigenous peoples of the Americas. That was a debate that was initiated by Catholic monks and scholars in Spain, right? Who had these debates.
Pause right there. Yeah, pause right there. So he's kind of conflating two different things, and I don't know if this is just the format where he's kind of like he's going into his talking points and didn't realize that he was creating a misimpression, or if he's deliberately creating a misimpression. But she queued him up for this point, which is that the debate over whether slaves are people and the indigenous people, are they people, regardless of whether they're enslaved or not. That happened, but the thing is that the debate would never happen in ancient Rome, because the Romans would be looking at the they're not human side as like, you guys are fucking barbarians. What the hell do you mean they're not humans? They're obviously humans, and they have like the same the same intelligence as us, the same capabilities as us, there and so on. Like the Romans were already square on this. Like they didn't have this idea. Like the idea that you would even debate this, like that it's even debatable, like, is so like barbaric in and of itself. That's an indictment of Christianity. He's trying to sell it as how wonderful Christianity is. Look, they were actually starting to debate this. It's like, no, that's a failure. Like that's a fall from where we used to be. The Roman status, like the Roman Stoic view, was that slaves were people. That they had rationalizations for how they had to be enslaved and how they could be treated and so on. But they didn't base that on the idea that they weren't people, that they were subhuman. And even Aristotle, who's like saying like, well, there are natural slaves who, because they're stupid, but they're also non-natural slaves who don't deserve to be slaves, but nevertheless are slaves anyway. The Romans rejected that idea that even just because someone's stupid that they should be enslaved. They rejected that idea, like the idea that all slaves are just slaves because of circumstance and human laws, not because of nature or anything like that. And so it's just weird for him. Like he conflates it to make it seem like the Catholics debated whether there should be slaves. That wasn't the debate. The debate was only over whether the slaves were people or not whether they could be enslaved. And that was the hilarious thing about this, that I think that he kind of skips right over that. She's trying to make it sound wonderful and is trying to softball him, but he segs into this example, but he's misrepresenting it deliberately or accidentally. I don't know, but he is misrepresenting what actually happened in this Catholic debate over how to treat indigenous peoples and how to see them. But again, it's not a break from paganism. The pagans were already on this page thousands of years before.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like anybody that would listen to him, speaking about the Roman society would immediately question, like, oh, wait, hold on. What, did they actually do that? But
right,
a lot of people don't think to check.
And also they might check and come up with cherry pick things to support one point of view, but because reality is complicated. So for instance, the Romans and the Greeks did look down on what they called barbarians, but they didn't look down on them biologically, right? Their idea wasn't that they weren't people. Their idea wasn't that they were biologically inferior. Their view was that their culture sucked, right? And so anyone, whether you were black, whether you were Chinese, it didn't matter. If you acquired and like perfected Greek culture, like say in Athens, if you mastered Greek language and culture, they didn't care what your biology was. Like you were now a Greek, and they didn't think that it was impossible for the barbarians to acquire Greek culture and become their equals. So their racism was more ethnocentrism. It wasn't biological racism. That was actually a creation of Christians. The idea, I mean, this is the famous saying of W.E.B. Du Bois, right? Is that before the explorations, there were no white people, is like he's credited as saying something similar to that. Because the idea of the concept of being a white person versus the idea that you would organize groups by the color of their skin didn't exist until the age of exploration, which is the 15th century, when it became necessary to enslave black people. And that's when the idea of slave versus free was based on color. White people versus black people. Black people are inferior, subhumans, etc. If you're not white, you're inferior biologically, and therefore you can be enslaved, etc. And so the Catholics did debate this idea, and there were Catholics who thought that slaves were at least like equal in terms of like being in their humanity, but they didn't argue that meant that they should be freed from slavery. It's just that it was still the Christians who invented this biological sorting of people to justify slavery. The fact that there were Christians debating that minute detail of what justifies slavery is not the same thing as debating whether there should even be slavery. Those are two different arguments. Yeah. And when you get to abolitionism, you see it comes out of the versions of Christianity. Well, it comes from, first of all, atheists and deists who aren't Christians, but also comes from versions of Christianity that Davidson designates as pagan, right? They're non-Christian because they're like Christless Christianities, like Thomas Jefferson or Thomas Paine. Even though Jefferson was a slave owner his whole life, he was uncomfortable with slavery, but he was like let's de-supernaturalize Jesus, right? So he's a pagan according to Davidson, right? Thomas Jefferson's a pagan according to him. Thomas Paine's a pagan in his point of view, even though he's a deist, really. But so abolitionism comes from like the Unitarians and the Congregationalists, these sort of like radical Christian sects that are, very progressive, not at all what this conservative, ultra-conservative Christian would accept as legitimate Christianity. And so that's the complexity of the story is being completely trodden over here. And I think that's significant because his worldview depends on the simplification of the story. He has to eliminate the complexities because otherwise his whole point just collapses immediately.
Yeah. You ready to continue?
Yeah.
No, I'm saying from the European perspective of what should our disposition be toward these peoples in the New World, and there was a debate about their humanity, about what responsibilities the Catholic Church and the Crown had to these people. It was the kind of debate, the fact that they were having a debate about this at all, I would say is a product of Christian civilization. It's not the kind of thing that would have been debated.
It's funny
that debate was invented by Christians.
It's funny that what the funny thing is that he thinks that's a good thing, right? Like his point is like, wow, the Christians were the first to debate this. It's like, no, the pagans figured out that was a dumbass debate like long before this, right? The pagans had already figured out that debate was dead. Like the whole they're not humans thing was just dead as an argument. No one believed that. So the fact that it was being debated is a mark against Christianity. That looks bad for Christianity. Why are they debating it? Why don't they have the Stoic view that the pagans already came to of slavery and of other ethnic groups, etc.? But he's just oblivious. So like his whole, he's so happy and proud. Like the debate. Look, Christians finally are debating it. And it's like, no, you shouldn't have been debating it. That's the bad thing about this story. The story is actually to the discredit of Christianity rather than to its praise.
In a pagan society at all, it would have been absolutely just subjugate these people.
The debates in the Ottoman Empire, the debates in China, debates in Japan, like there's everybody debates. Like
I'm talking about a debate about whether or not these people should be just enslaved like animals and treated as such, or should their inherent dignity and humanity be recognized as children of God, and our goal should be to bring them.
Greeks and the Romans all debate.
So notice how he won't say manumit them, like free them. Like he says, like he is here saying like the debate was over whether to treat them poorly. The debate wasn't over whether to enslave them. Like both sides of the debate in these Christians agreed to enslave them. So he's couching the way he describes this to make it almost sound like they were debating whether slavery was okay. But that was never on the table as a debate, that no one debated that. And so it's just the way he phrases it is so sleazily misleading that I find that problematic. But I don't know if he's doing that like as a liar, like he knows the truth and is deceiving. I suspect that this guy really believes his own bullshit. So I think he's talking to himself as much as he is to the hosts, right? It's like this is his version of reality that he has to convince himself of in order to proceed as he is. And I really do think he's sincere. He's just in that delusional mindset. He's skirting the issues and eliding the issues and shoving things out to the side and then like sort of misrepresenting what happened really in this. So that's important to note, I think, in this moment.
Yeah. And in my mind, just because maybe I've been in the slavery and Christianity conversation so long, he painted one side as like, oh, should these people be treated? You were making the distinction, like he's talking about how should they be treated. At no point in any of that, like you were saying, is whether or not slavery or these people should be slaves, but he kind of portrays it as if like one side is, oh, we treat them as like animals, so they are slaves, or oh no, they're inherently have value or whatnot because
they are equals. God. Right.
Yeah. So the implication being they shouldn't be slaves, but he doesn't directly say it. Yeah. So yeah.
Which is actually the point that Ryan was making, and even Emily a little bit, which is the idea that like if they realized that slaves were their equals, even by command of God, even, why didn't they end slavery, right? Like how do you explain the logic of this? Like, if you think, oh yeah, they're created in the image of God, they are equals, then if you really believed that, and you really believe that that entails that they shouldn't be slaves, why didn't slavery end 1,000 years earlier? Why didn't it end during these Catholic debates? Why did we have to literally fight a fucking deadly war against an entire country of Christians to end slavery in this country? Like, it doesn't make any sense. So his perspective on how this all happened and what the thinking was is very delusional. And I think it's important to really notice that. And these two hosts, even when she's softballing him, she's almost trying to nudge him towards saying something comforting rather than horrible. And he's not getting it. Anyway, that's my thought so far, but let's see where this goes.
Okay.
Debated that.
And
I mean,
on one side of it.
Aristotle debated he disagreed with the practice, how slavery was practiced, but he accepted at the very beginning of the politics, he accepts the premise of natural slavery and natural rulers. His quibble is with the implementation of it, not with the philosophical position that slavery is a natural state for some people. And this was common, but this was never accepted in Christianity in centuries and centuries of Catholic Europe.
Pause right there.
It was only...
No, that's absolutely not true. Even Thomas Aquinas, who wrote a commentary on the politics of Aristotle, has a section where he agrees with Aristotle on this principle. Now, to be clear, Aristotle said that there are natural slaves, like people who are stupid, and there are unnatural slaves, people who aren't stupid but are enslaved anyway. And Aquinas completely agrees with this, and it became the standard in the Catholic Church. So it's not true that Christianity sort of uniquely eliminated this idea of natural slavery. Now, there was as you get after Aquinas, you get more debates over whether there's natural slavery or not, but that's not the same argument as whether slavery is just or not, right? Like the idea of what justifies slavery is different from whether it's justified. And so this is a kind of digression. But also, to bring back the point, is like Aristotle was rejected almost immediately. His view of natural slavery was not the norm after that. Like the Epicureans and the Stoics prevailed largely over the societal understanding of slavery. And you get this even from the comedies of the time. You could read like some of the comedies, like you read some of the comic plays, right, of the period throughout classical antiquity. And you notice like there's all of these sort of biting jokes about the Aristotelian view, right? Like to the point indicating that the authors really and the audience really know that this is bullshit. Aristotle is full of shit, right? And so like there's a famous case. I think I have an example of it here. Let me see if I can find it. Let's see. Oh, here we go. So Aristophanes, right? So Aristophanes is a contemporary of Socrates, a little bit before Aristotle. They might have their period of life might have overlapped. So he wrote in a play. I can't remember what play it is. I just quickly grabbed the quote from the play. But so Praxagora talks about like their great vision for the future of society, and they say this: "I want all to have a share of everything, and all property to be in common. There will no longer be either rich or poor. I shall begin by making land, money, everything that is private property common to all." And Blepyrus, someone who's present, says, "But who will till the soil?" And Praxagora says, "The slaves." So do you get it? Like the joke is only funny if you get that the idea of Aristotle's natural slavery thing is bullshit, right? Like, so the audience, the writer knows this, the audience knows this, the people who are laughing know this. Like, they know it's a stupid joke. Like, they know it's stupid, this idea that, like, there's this, well, of course, slaves are not included in this common property, wonderful society thing. It's like, they're aware. They're well aware that slavery is an unjust institution. And even at the time of Aristotle, they were aware of this. And so his whole characterization of things is false. And when you look at the Christian authors, they're just reinforcing Aristotle, which is worse than the pagans. Like the Romans got away from Aristotle. The Christians took a lot longer to actually get to the Stoic view, if even they did. Like certainly the American slavers did not. Like they kept the sort of radical God has ordained that black people are inferior and therefore should be enslaved. They were adopting the Aristotelian view, and yet they were super Christian, right? And so the abolitionists sort of bought into the Stoic pagan view. But that's the thing, is like when they're arguing for abolition, they're doing it on a basis of pagan thought, not on a basis of Christian thought. Whereas the Southerners are all quoting the Bible accurately in defense of slavery. And so his perspective on the history of slavery is completely delusional and contrafactual.
Yeah, I mean, I really don't understand how you can sit there and try to twist it in the way that he is, considering all of the information that we have about slavery and Christianity.
Well, notice he is delusional, so he doesn't check, right? So like if you read his book, you'll notice like he doesn't read anything at all that would challenge his point of view. So he never engages with opponents. He never engages with falsifiers, like people who say things that don't agree with what he says people say, you know. So he never checks facts. He only cherry picks and looks for verification. He looks for things that agree with what he wants to believe and avoids things that would challenge that belief, and then presents that in the construction of his view of reality. And so you see that throughout the book. The whole book is constructed that way, where he ignores all of history and all philosophers and everything that would challenge his point of view, but includes everything he can find, even the dirtiest little, rarest little hole, anything, any weirdo that he can find and represent as sort of representative as of Western civilization. Like he'll do that because it agrees with his worldview and it constructs, and then he weaves it together and it looks so elegant. It's like, yeah, I must be fucking right. And so, but that's how a delusional mind works, right? Is like you ignore all evidence that contradicts you, and you go cherry picking all evidence that you can weave a sort of gerrymander that makes your worldview make sense. That's what he's done. And so I think he's deluded himself into believing the things that he says. And I think that's what's happened here.
Yeah. All right. You ready to continue?
Yeah.
Only in a modern context, in the 19th century, when the antebellum South posited this very unchristian, very pagan argument that slavery was natural, and it was an aberration, it was a departure from how Christianity had been approaching this issue for centuries and centuries.
Not really true, but yeah.
Not only in the New World.
Against
Yeah. I mean, I think it's pretty obvious that centuries and like it's not like slave. Well, let me ask you this, because I've looked into this a little bit, and it's a little bit, it's very nuanced. But
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Did slavery stop and then start back up with the Atlantic slave trade?
No. Oh no. So yeah, it is complicated because slavery was always a thing, but it had largely been replaced by serfdom. So
that's what I found too.
Yeah. So, but serfdom is slavery. It's just not. It's a different kind. It's a different model of slavery. So if you were a serf, and this started by Constantine, by the way, which in a totally Orwellian decree, Constantine, the first Christian emperor, right? In a totally Orwellian decree, he says, in order to ensure that free farmers can perform their labor as befits a free man, ... And that he makes all these things. So first, they're bound to the land. They cannot leave. They can be sold with the land. They are always, forever, for the rest of their life, obligated to pay a certain amount, like take a certain amount of their produce and give it to the person who owns the land, quote unquote, land, right? Owns the land / them, has to give them a certain amount of produce. And their sons have to inherit the job. So the sons can't leave. They can't go get another job. If there's a farmer, they have to be a farmer. If they're a blacksmith, they have to be a blacksmith. And they have to give a certain amount of their returns to their people who own them, and they can never leave. Right. So like, this is slavery, right? Like, so like Constantine made it sound like it's not slavery. It's fucking slavery. It's just another form of slavery. And it was done to a massive, like millions of free farmers. So this is something, these were free share farmers who actually were renting their land. he enslaved them and created serfdom. And so that was the model for Europe for a really long time. In Eastern Europe, or the Middle East, the Eastern Roman Empire, I do think it was more slavery than serfdom. I think slavery was survived longer there. And because we know even like the Quran like talks about slavery and things like that. So slavery is a normal institution at the time. It would be more interesting to look at China. And this is, so Ryan mentioned China briefly, and that made me think, that's interesting. I've never looked into the history of slavery in China. And so I did a little bit of a dive in that. And I was really, I mean, clearly there's more for me to learn there than I have so far. But what I've seen is really interesting is that China, despite being an empire that would rival the Roman Empire in terms of its technological and economic development, China almost like never really had slavery. Like it's about 1% they estimate of the population was slaves. And China always recognized that as a problem. Like you go back as far as they have texts writing about slavery, everybody's bothered by it, right? Like, so like it's constant, like, and multiple people are trying to stop it, but it only gets preserved because of the way the fiefdoms and, you know, it basically selfishness intervenes. So every time an emperor tries to end slavery, the feudal lords or whatever, like, no, fuck you, we're not doing what you're saying because we like our slaves. But the slaves were not like their society wasn't built on slavery. Their economy wasn't built on slavery. Slavery was an incidental thing that existed and that no one really liked. And for a really long time, people tried to get rid of. And then eventually they did, although it was after Western influence. But the history of slavery in China is so different from the history of slavery in the West that it does really inform like this idea, like why did China, this massively pagan society, never develop a system of economic slavery? Like they were not dependent on slaves. Like they had no real slave economy. There were slaves, but there were so few of them, like it didn't matter for their economy for thousands of years, like from the beginning. Why then did Christians keep them, right? Like, so like even the Chinese could figure out that we don't need these fuckers. Why don't need this institution? The institution sucks. And they're talking about it all the time about how it sucks. And so, but the Christians don't, right? Like that's not, there's no anti-slavery discussion among Christians. There's one, I think Gregory of Nyssa is like a rare outlier. I think he's the only one that we can point to who really fucking had a bug up his ass about slavery and says, this is fucking stupid, we shouldn't have it. But no one listened to him. So like all of Christendom just did not follow Gregory of Nyssa on slavery ever, like all the way up to the Civil War in America.
Right. Okay, are you ready to finish this section?
Yeah. Let's see what we got.
Slavery in like 1100.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, the idea of human rights or of peace, that war should be confined and non-combatants should be protected. These were things that medieval Catholic Europe came up with.
That's true, but
pause. That's a misrepresentation, and I talked about that earlier. Like that was not. So he says non-combatants should not be attacked or whatever. No, that's not what any medieval laws said or any medieval thing said. It was more selfish than that. It was more restricted than that, etc. And I already briefed that earlier, so we don't need to go into that. But notice how he just misrepresents it. Like he just overgeneralizes in order to make Christianity sound awesome.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that it's his entire, I mean, obviously apologetics in general is meant to do that, but
yeah,
it seems
fair.
like it's very much on display here. Like if I had to pick a video for that to sort of showcase how apologists twist information in order to make, I guess a turd look like chocolate ice cream. This would be a good,
yeah.
I feel like this would be a good video for that.
Yeah, and I did think that, so for the audience, like we're only showing clips. It's worth watching the whole video. It's actually a decent video. Like everything, like there's no straw man here. So Davidson is like, what he represents really is what he argues in the book. There's more to it in the book that sort of changes perspective, but he's accurately representing his views. Ryan's making good pushback. Like Emily's asking some good questions. So like, it's actually a decent, it was 30 minutes. I think it was less than really
16.
Yeah. It's only 16 minutes. So it was a decent interview, even
Yeah.
considering that Ryan is cold. Like, he doesn't even know what the book is about. And so he's just reacting to some stuff that's being thrown at him right here in the debate. So it's actually a decent video to watch. But you're right. There's a lot of lessons here that you can teach from. And I keep thinking we're going to get to the one that I was thinking about. We still haven't yet, but let's see if it's coming up.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so this last part, I did cut out a little bit here. Like I said, if I cut out the part that you're thinking about, I can go and find it. But
okay.
This part right here, I jump a little bit, and I'm really only jumping over them kind of discussing more of the wartime stuff with pagans and how they were acting.
I think this is it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, I jump over that part too.
Oh,
it's just before the Nazi thing. So do you want me to find
the Comanche thing? Did you cut that out? The Comanches. He references the Comanches. That was really, really pissed me off. So one of the things that Ryan was doing all of this is like, look, like Christians are just as awful as the pagans. Why is Christianity any better? Right? Like, that's kind of like the thing that he keeps pushing him on. And so Davidson responds by saying, like, well, look at the Aztecs and all the horrible things that pagans did. And it's like, yeah, you're cherry picking like the worst case. Like there's plenty of pagans that didn't do those things, right? Like, human sacrifice was super rare. Like, and he goes in the book, he goes on about the Carthaginians killed children. It's like, yeah, but everybody complained about it. Like, there's like almost no one did that. Like, that was really exceptional and universally condemned by all the outsiders, right? But he throws in the thing like the horribly violent Comanches. I'm paraphrasing, that's not what he literally says, but he gives the Comanches as an example of these horribly violent, warlike pagans. And it's like, okay. I even think he says the Comanche Wars, like quote unquote, like the Comanche Wars. Okay. Wow. Okay. Let's talk about the Comanche Wars, right? Like, so what? Just Wikipedia. Just go to Wikipedia on the Comanche Wars and read, like, yeah, we were fucking them over and they defended themselves. That's it. Right? Like, constantly we would keep fucking with them and they would keep defending themselves. We would keep fucking with them and they would keep defending themselves. It's not because like the Comanches were like pagans that are all about domination and war. It's like, no, we were all about domination and war, and they were just good at resisting. That was really the only thing that happened there. And it's just very insulting to.
Yeah. Okay. So I got that segment pulled up.
Okay. Yeah. It's just very insulting to use the Comanche tribe as an example of immoral pagans in the context of the argument that Christians were just as awful, because it was the fucking Christians that forced this. The Comanche Wars are all caused by Christians, not the Comanches. The Comanches aren't these like war domineering imperialists trying to conquer and subjugate Christians. No, that's not what fucking happened. But anyway, yeah, you can show his. It's just a very throwaway comment of his, but yeah, let's see it.
Okay.
True, but one reason for that is that these Christians were doing more war than anybody else in history.
Than who? Than Genghis Khan?
I mean, Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan's the exception. More war than North Americans, South Americans, Chinese, Africans.
More war than the Aztecs. I don't know. More war than more war than the Egyptians, the Comanche.
Yeah. Look,
I didn't realize
look
Emily
around the world.
is the Comanche. Emily fucking hosed him on that by throwing that out there. Yeah, okay. So I can't blame him entirely for that. That was Emily's faux pas. Yeah, really bad example. But notice what's happening here is that Ryan made a point that most pagan societies are super peaceful. And how does Davidson respond? Is like, look how horrible these pagan societies were. It's like, yeah, you're cherry picking the worst cases. He's not even really doing that because the Comanche don't count for the reason I gave. Even the others don't really count. Like the Aztecs, like, are they really that much worse? Really? Like, they're kind of just as bad. Like, if you think of like all of the children that Christians killed over slavery, right? Like, so like, they would kill slave children all the time, like slave babies and whatnot. They didn't care, right? So the wanton murder Like you really can't like and it's also especially Davidson talks about abortion and euthanasia as pagan sacrifices. This is in the book. This is how we're pagan now. It's like there are sacrifices, like some cult sacrifices. It's like, well, if you count abortion and euthanasia as human sacrifice, his words, well, then all of the slaves who were murdered by Christians are human sacrifices. All of the people horribly tortured and killed in the Inquisition are human sacrifices. Like if you apply the same standard, Ryan is right. The Christians are worse. They're worse. And that's the thing. He just rides right over that by just throwing out these names of like these religions that he thinks were terrible. But like, how many wars did the Aztecs fight? Like, you know, did they try to? Do they now own Guam? Right, right. Like, did they like once claim to own the Philippines? You know, it's like, did they support the Spanish-American War and so on? Like, these are the things where you get these sort of ridiculous ideas of like, okay, the Aztecs had human sacrifice. They were warlike. That's true. Were they more warlike than America has been throughout its 300 years now history, almost? I don't think so, right? Like, I think Ryan is right about this. That's the thing is like, I think Davidson just wants this problem to go away. This argument, he wants it to go away. And so he's cherry picked the worst examples he can think of and put them forward as if this is what all pagans are. He skipped over China totally, like, ignored that. But it's all true. Like, I think this is Ryan's point is valid, and Davidson has avoided it with this cherry picking fallacy. And that's very typical, I think, certainly of a delusional person, also of a liar, but also of a delusional person who isn't a liar. Like, I think Davidson is really, in his mind, has hallucinated out of existence all the peaceful pagan societies that have ever existed. And that's what's happened, right? It has to be. The Aztecs were terrible, therefore pagans are terrible. It has to be true, right? I can rattle off three groups that I think were warlike, therefore all pagans were warlike. Like, that's literally what's going on in his mind, right? Like, that's what's happening here. That's how a delusional worldview forms. And Ryan's pushing back against it and not getting the headway.
No, I mean, you're definitely not going to make any kind of, because I feel like John Davidson's the kind of apologist that can spin anything to anybody.
Oh yeah, including himself. I think like he is really convincing himself here. This is he's as much arguing to himself as he is to the hosts.
Mm-hmm. All right, are you ready to continue? We're kind of in the home stretch. I'm actually really surprised we were able to get this far in, but here we go.
Good. Yeah.
Look at the biggest wars and the U.S. and Europe.
You're talking about modern, like World War I and World War II.
Yeah, but if
you're talking about, right?
Yeah, but if you look at how far they went.
Well, World War II was a pagan war, right?
That's another maneuver called framing. So he reframed. I know for a fact, and I think Ryan fell for it. I think Ryan definitely meant more than just the 20th century, because he specifically earlier mentioned the war of the genocidal wars during our isolationist period earlier. So his argument, like, he's thinking of the entire history of the United States. How often have we been at war? Like fucking always, like almost all the time. Like, if you think of like all the wars we fought against Native American tribes, tons of them, like Tecumseh, like you can just go down the list. Like, they're just constantly at war. And the Spanish-American War, the Civil War, there's so many wars, right? Like, just the War of 1812. There's like wars everywhere, right? Like, we're just at war a lot, right? And so, but what Davidson did right there is he tried to reframe it. Oh, you just mean the 20th century. You just mean World War I and World War II. Well, okay, so what about the Vietnam War? What about the Korean War? What about Grenada? What about Iraq? What about like there's the war in the Congo that no one fucking writes about, which just blows me away. We weren't directly involved in that, but we were indirectly involved in that. So like we were funding the war in Afghanistan. We funded the Taliban. That was our war. We were fighting a war in Ecuador. We mined the bay. Was it Honduras? I can't remember. There was some Central American country that we fucking mined their bay. Like, we're just come on, man. Like, it's the thing is like Ryan has made a point, and he's trying to reframe it as, oh, you just mean World War I and World War II. Ryan fell for the reframe, and so he's caught in the trap of this rhetorical argument. And that's what's happened right here. It was sad to see, but I understand, because like Ryan's, up against the ropes, like he's blindsided. But he dropped the ball here on that, and it's not his fault. It's just he got maneuvered, and that's what happened.
Yeah, that's a little bad to see.
Yeah. Bay of Pigs. I mean, I just keep going on.
Nazi Germany was a post-Christian society. The Soviet Union was a post-Christian society. These were
Nietzsche's primary argument against Christianity was that it was in some ways too
Nazis were pagan?
equated people. I think Nazis were pagan.
Yeah, Nazis were absolutely pagan. So Nazis were honest enough, like the Marquis de Sade, right?
This is totally fake. What he's about to say is completely bullshit. So for those, I have an article. I forgot about that one. My article on Hitler. So there's a blog article I wrote on Hitler wasn't a pantheist. And it's specifically arguing against a different argument, but the rebuttal to that argument applies to this argument as well, which is the idea that Hitler and the Nazis weren't Christians. He's about to say a bunch of things. We'll play it and you'll see. Everything he says is false. The Nazis were super Christian. Their entire platform was Christian. It was based on German Lutheranism. They had their own Christian sect called Positive Christianity. Almost all Germans and almost all Nazis were Christians. Mein Kampf defends the whole principle of defeating the Jews based on Christianity. It's all Christian. It is not any of the things that he's about to say, but proceed.
Okay.
To say, if we're going to reject Christianity, then the Christian morality has got to go. There's no
Nazis
basis
never said either of those things.
they
They never said let's get rid of Christianity, and they never said we should therefore get rid of other things. No, that never an argument any Nazi ever made. But anyway, go on.
People as though they have inherent dignity and worth. Let's just liquidate all these people.
But they tried to keep the trappings. They liked some of the trappings of Christianity, but they took Christ, quite literally took Christ out of the Christianity.
And didn't they go after the communists?
No, they centered their whole philosophy on Christ. So positive Christianity, for those who don't know, and I talk about it in that article on was Hitler a pantheist? Positive Christianity. And so there's a whole thing like Hitler was publicly Catholic. And the Catholic Church never excommunicated him. So officially, Hitler was always a Catholic, super Christian. Privately, the evidence suggests that Hitler really didn't like Catholicism, that he really liked positive Christianity, which was a Nazi version of Christianity. In positive Christianity, Christ was an Arian. So what they did is they adopted the Jewish polemic against Christians, which was that Mary wasn't a virgin. She was impregnated by a Roman soldier. The Nazis took that as true. Therefore, Jesus was fathered by an Arian and therefore was an Arian. And then they reinterpreted the Gospels as Jesus sticking it to the Jews. So every argument that Jesus makes is an argument against the Jews, not against the Pharisees, not against an interpretation of Judaism. It was Jesus was anti-Jewish, and everything was sticking it to the Jews, basically talking about how the Jews are terrible. That's everything Jesus did. And so Jesus was therefore an ideal representative of the Aryan worldview. And consequently, Nazism, the positive Christian Nazism was built around this view of Christ. It was very Christ-centered. And Hitler himself appears to have believed that he would go to heaven. He appears to have believed that he was chosen by God to defeat the Jews. It was the whole thing. And he appears to have endorsed this view of Jesus as the Aryan Christ who was fathered by a Roman soldier and all this stuff, and Paul as the Jewish traitor to Christianity. So this is a weird view of the positive Christians, that Paul was an anti-Christian, too Jewish for them, which is really weird for people who know the whole thing about Paul and how he was getting rid of kosher. But anyway. That was the view. And so that's the reality. And there's good books on this. There's Holy Reich. There's The Aryan Jesus. There's books on this by leading historians that have written about this. And I cite them in various places.
Okay. It's usually come up, this whole idea of Hitler not being Christian and being rather pagan. And I know that there's a bit of a nuance there to, like, I guess, the Nazi regime in general, because you had kind of a mixture of, and I know that this is going to come up here in a second.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I know Hitler himself was very much, had a very Christian mindset with all that, but other people in his
There
cabinet or
were
whatever.
it's a good point. So there were a few neo-pagans, explicit neo-pagans among the Nazis who wanted to return to the original German pagan view. But they were a minority, very small fringe group within the Nazis. There were also atheists. Martin Bormann, for example, was sort of this, he had an atheist worldview that supported his whole Aryan ideas and stuff like that. But they were also very fringe. Not a lot of them. Most of the Nazis and Hitler himself were Christian and driven by Christian ideals. And even like Hector Avalos is the one who did the article in the chapter in The Christian Delusion. So it's a book edited by John Loftus, but he has a chapter where he compares Darwin's beliefs with the platform of Martin Luther, the founder of Protestantism, regarding the Jews. And you can see item by item by item, the Nazi program against the Jews was Martin Luther's, not Darwin's, right? And so you can see directly the influence that this is very, very, very much a Christian movement. And it just had a few atheist and neo-pagan writers. It wasn't like the German people. It wasn't the Nazi party. The dominant view was Christian, definitely, in both respects.
Okay.
It's godless.
The Nazis were their god was sort of the pagan Volk, right? This very clearly hearkening back to a pre-Christian, even in their aesthetics, right?
It was Nordic,
I'm assuming that's a mistake. So he said the god was the folk, which means the people. I think he meant to say something about like the original gods of the folk, right? Like the original ideals of the folk. But yeah, he's describing the Nazi neo-pagan movement, which was a super minority movement within the Nazis that did argue that. But no, like that doesn't describe Hitler or the majority of Nazis or even like the impetus for the Holocaust, to be frank.
Okay. Yeah, I know that it kind of feels like they're really trying to make it seem like it's more pagan, like Hitler, the Nazis, and all those kind of ideas were more pagan than they actually were.
It's also worth pointing out, like they bring up the aesthetics thing, like that just happened, right? So this is the danger of equivocation fallacies. Remember, he's using the word pagan weirdly, right? So Emily has bought the affective fallacy, where now she's thinking pagan means pagan, like worship of pagan gods, like polytheism. But that's not what he means, right? Like, so he's never meant that this whole conversation. Now, he never got into it. In the book, he's explicit, but here, like, he means by pagan sort of a metaphorical pagan, not a literal pagan, not someone who worships or idolizes ancient gods. He means pagan is just anyone who unseats God and replaces him with anything else. Just literally anything else is a pagan. So that's what he means when he says pagan. What she meant by pagan was the whole like ancient Germanic, polytheistic, pre-Christian, what's it not. Now, the thing is like they're also wrong about the aesthetics. All their aesthetics actually doesn't really track that narrative. It doesn't go back to ancient Germany. It actually goes back to, you could say it goes back to Roman, like they idolized the Roman Empire, but that went through the phase of the Holy Roman Empire, which was when it was Christianized, right? So the idea of like idolizing the aesthetics of ancient Rome to the Germans wasn't idolizing paganism. It was idolizing the ideal state of Christianity, which was the Holy Roman Empire, which was when the Roman Empire was Christian. And so she's sliding right past that. But yeah, the trading on the different meanings of paganism has happened here. Like, what does pagan mean? Is it a metaphor or do you mean literal pagan? That has become confused in this conversation. And that is an example of how Davidson is using the word to create an affective fallacy where you have emotional attachment to paganism as polytheism, and you're now porting it over to something that has nothing to do with that, he's tricked everybody into doing that. He's done it to the hosts already right here in real time. And so that's something to pay attention to, is the use of words to manipulate how you understand what's actually going on in the conversation.
Right. You ready to continue on with this? We're almost done.
Cool.
Sense in which the Nazis were a manifestation of Christian cosmology, right? This was very clearly post-Christian. And so when I say post-Christian, and the reason I say the Nazis were at least honest about it, is that if you get rid of the Christian claims, you eventually have to get rid of the Christian morality too. So I mentioned the Marquis de Sade. During the Enlightenment, there was this rejection, overt rejection of Christianity, and specifically attacks against the Catholic Church. Marquis de Sade said, well, not only should we attack Christianity, but we should sweep away Christian morality as well. There's no reason why the strong should, scrape and bow before the weak. That's against nature, right?
That's what Nietzsche said too.
Yeah, that's what Marquis de Sade. That's what Nietzsche said. That's what the Nazis said, right? And that is what pagan society. That's the principle in which pagan society.
I mean, they did, but they justified it based on Christianity, right? Like, so Hitler himself, said, that's based on God's principles. Nature, God has arranged it this way. So that was, it wasn't that they said Christianity is false, therefore we can do whatever we want, which is Nietzsche. Their view was that, no, God actually told us we could do these things. That was their view, right? So it's actually a version of Christianity. It's not this pagan idea where if you get rid of Christianity, suddenly everyone is a Nazi. That's not how history works. That's not how ideology works. That's not how philosophy works at all. But he wants you to think that emotionally. It's important for him for you to emotionally think that if you get rid of Christianity, we become Nazis. Now we all know, Charlottesville, etc., modern Nazis, neo-Nazis are super Christian. There are atheist Nazis, certainly, but a lot of them are really Christian. And Christian nationalism and neo-Nazis, really strong overlap. Right? There's some of them are identical. That's the reality, right? So yeah, there's nuance there, but it doesn't help him.
Well, yeah. So some people would say that Hitler hated Christianity. Is there any nuance to that or anything like that?
No. He had issues with Catholicism, or at least we think he did. So this is a problem. I have another article on Hitler Redux. You can go and there's a whole backstory. So I have a whole other thing that I've done in peer-reviewed studies. Is I actually have written an article that's changed Hitler studies and led to other research by Mikhail Nielsen and other people. But so there's a document called the Hitler's Table Talk that was purported to represent the candid thoughts of Hitler. Now there's tons of problems with it, as a source. It's been hugely edited. It's been doctored. It's not terribly reliable. But if you can wade through the issues, it does suggest that Hitler really thought Catholicism specifically was ridiculous, even though he was publicly Catholic. But he really, really loved positive Christianity. He was super into it, and genuinely believed it. He actually thought that he was going to go to heaven. He actually thought God meant him to be the ruler of Germany and conquer the world. He really thought that he was doing God's will and so on. So he's definitely driven by his Christian view. It's just he will make fun of Catholic things like transubstantiation. So in this supposedly candid remarks of Hitler, he makes fun of transubstantiation. He doesn't make fun of Christianity. This is very important to make these two things clear in the way they mean. So in German, Christentum can mean Christianity in the broad sense, but it can also mean Christendom, as in Catholicism, in terms of the way it ruled Europe for a long time. And so when Hitler uses Christentum in German, my pronunciation is terrible, he generally means Catholicism, not all versions of Christianity. And you can tell because he will then go on to talk about other ways of thinking about Christianity in a positive way. So he clearly didn't think of Christianity itself as a problem. He actually was totally pro-Christian. He just was anti-Catholic. And that's assuming we can trust this source, which is, you know, if you abandon that, then all bets are off. But
right. Yeah. And I get that pushback a lot, you know, on social media and everything about Hitler hating Christianity, but it's like, if you read his speeches and everything, it's very obvious that maybe he didn't agree with certain denominations, but he definitely was.
Which
definitely
reminds me, that's a good point. Yeah, you remind me to point out that there are false quotes of Hitler. They are English translations from a quote-unquote official English translation of the German. The translations are bogus in many cases. So you need to be really careful about what quotes of Hitler you trust online. And that's one of the things I found out, is that a lot of these quotes circulating, not all of them, but a lot of them, are translations of a French translation of the German, and the French translation is bogus. Just FYI. So if you go back to the original German, Hitler did not say what those quotes say. But also the German is questionable. I have to point that out. So if you look at my website for Hitler Redux, we're not so sure about the German. And there's a long, complicated story. And it really does set on the premise that, as I learned from reading the book that Mikhail Nilsson wrote on this, all Nazis are liars. So you can't fucking trust any Nazi. Like, they just fucking lie all the time, constantly. And this is a problem for historians. It's really difficult to reconstruct what really happened when Nazis just fucking lie all the time. And so if you want to see why that matters and how this complicates the question, my article on Hitler Redux, which is Mikhail Nilsson's book, will fill you in, basically.
Had always been organized. And what I'm saying is that Christian civilization was organized on different principles, never fully realized, right? Ideals that we are always moving toward, never quite going to achieve, because this is the world and we're fallen, you know, people are what they are. But the ideal and the claim, the ontological claim about what people are, was fundamentally different than what pagans posited.
Last word.
Yeah.
I feel like everything that we've covered in this live stream tonight shows that that's just not true.
Yeah. No, totally true. But also remember, he's playing word games with the word pagan, right? So he includes false Christianities, which is almost all Christianities, in his term pagan. So this complicates his narrative about the Germans, right? So the Nazis were just as much a Christian sect as any other. Now you can say, well, that was a perversion of Christianity. It's like, yeah, well, most Christianities are perversions of Christianity. Maybe all Christianities are perversions of Christianity. I remember I have a girlfriend who used to be Jehovah's Witness. And one of the points she often makes is like we had the true religion, right? Like, we had the true Christianity. And she would like give the list of reasons, and like, you're kind of making a good argument. So for instance, like the Jehovah's Witnesses reject the view that Jesus was God. Because when you look at the earliest literature, that wasn't the case. Jesus was an avatar, like a messenger of God. He was an angel sent by God, and he was bestowed powers by God. He represented qualities of God, but he was not literally God. He was not identical to God. And the Jehovah's Witnesses are correct about that. And there are various other things you can list about the Jehovah's Witnesses that are actually closer to the original Christianity than all of the bullshit Christianities like Catholicism, which ironically Davidson, who I'm pretty sure is not a Catholic, claims is like the sort of representative version of Christianity. But Catholicism is full of millions of tons of bullshit that has nothing to do with the original Christianity. It is wildly deviant from original Christianity. And you can say that about any sect, right? But again, he's playing this game where we can cherry pick the Christianities he hates and thinks are pagan and hold them up as representative of how Christians are great, but then chuck them as soon as he wants policy done, right? Like, and so really what he means by pagan is anybody, literally anybody, who doesn't adopt my very specific ultra conservative version of Christianity. That's what he means, really. That's code. Pagan is code for everyone who doesn't agree with me on my very, very, very specific version of this religion. And once you see it that way, like everything he just said back there really doesn't make any sense, right? Like, so you can say like, yeah, okay, if that's all you say, what you haven't done is defend your version of Christianity. Why should we follow your super hyper conservative version of Christianity versus, you could say, the positive Christianity of Hitler? Mm-hmm. Why is that bad? Like, you could say like it's wrong. You can try to argue it's wrong, but then you say like, why shouldn't we be Anabaptists or Quakers or Unitarians or Jehovah's Witnesses? Like, he doesn't really give you any clue as to how you're supposed to answer that question, because it can't be answered, right? And that's the one of many problems with Christianity. For those who really want to dig into this, I have an article called "Christianity is a Conspiracy Theory," and it's particularly salient right now because he didn't talk about it in this interview, but in the book, he's clearly a demonologist. He believes that demons are real and actually do things and influence people and stuff. He actually thinks that Deuteronomy is talking about slaying armies of demons. Like, that's literally in his book. Anyway, so my article on Christianity as a conspiracy theory illustrates how bizarre and ridiculous Christianity is when you step back and look at it objectively and not as someone who's like grown up in a Christian culture, right? So if you look at it just like as it is, like, oh my God, this is like lizard people theory. Like it's not a credible theory at all, but that's what he's trying to sell. Anyway, so that's what's happened in this 16 minutes of this.
Yeah. And I think it's right here at the end. Do you want to hear like their final points or anything?
Yeah. Okay. Let's write it out.
Right.
No, go ahead and read this book. But I don't know. I think if the U.S. is held up as the example, as the most Christian nation, that doesn't bode well for linking nationalism and Christianity, just based on our behavior over the last.
if America is your poster child for Christian nationalism, you done bad, son.
Yeah.
200 years.
I was going to say what's somewhat interesting about this conversation is that all three of us share a very, very similar foreign policy at the moment. So I
don't know what your guys' foreign policy is.
He's a full Leninist. But no, I mean, we pretty much agree on what's happening right now. All that is to say, I actually think this was very helpful to have a conversation from the right. We do a lot on the left. And
I would have liked to have heard her expand on that, because I don't know what she means. So that's like a inside joke going on there. Like even the guest is outside the inside joke. Like he doesn't know it. What are you talking about? Like what does she mean going on right now? She's talking about the Gaza war. She's talking about Ukraine. She's talking about China. Like what does she mean? That was interesting, but it just like she threw it, like it was completely off topic, and she just threw it in there suddenly. And I don't know why she brought that up. Why is that relevant to this conversation? And I think like it would be more obvious to me why it was if I knew what it was, and she didn't go into it, and neither did Ryan. But anyway, that'll be an eternal mystery, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I do believe that's it. They're just sort of wrapping up and, sort of tapering off.
No, that was it. And that does represent like his case, right? So if you read the book, he goes into more detail and specifics and stuff. But what you get mostly in the book that you don't get in the video is all the things he's terrified of. So like the whole book is all about the shit that he's scared of, right? And so he goes into more detail, and he goes into specific examples of like Bernie Sanders freaked me out, and Ocasio-Cortez freaked me out, and here's why. And it's like you get a lot of that stuff, and then you get the policy, you get the actual sell. What is the thing that he's selling? And so that's in the last chapter of his book, but you really you won't get that totally if you don't read the rest of the book, or at least skim and read sections of it. Because I read a lot of it, and I got a sense of what's going on here. The demonology stuff really flipped me out. That was he's serious. He's serious about the demons, but yeah.
So we are about to head into the super chats. I had a lot of fun on this stream talking about this. This is a topic that I feel is very important, especially now,
Yeah.
like addressing the Christian nationalist claims, because there are a lot of claims out there going around similar to what he's purporting.
And they're pushing for legitimacy. That's important to know, because they really do want to win. And they have a lot of money. It's worth pointing out. So yeah.
Yes. KC said stealing from all the poor people, meaning the 10% tithe that a lot of places, which is crazy. There are some churches out there, not like more than like the really heavy like tithing ones like Mormons, but even Baptist churches. I've heard in the past of them sending out bills to their parishioners if they don't donate enough. It's crazy. It's like, we know how much you make, Brandon.
Yeah. That's interesting. So that's another thing. Like, it would be interesting to have Davidson on for a conversation, because in the book, he seems to have kind of a problem with that. So like, he has an issue with Christianities that are fake, right? And so there's a thing in there where he has this elaborate argument about how Christians need to don't need to pursue like money-making professions to bring money into the church. He thinks that is corrupting, which is one of the like positive things that he argues. Right? He thinks that Christians should choose trades that don't morally compromise them. And he says like that means that you will be poor, but you can still be a political activist. And I found this interesting, is like that's an example to me of someone like, he's sincere. Like, he really does believe his own bullshit. It's not all a game to him. Like he really thinks that we should sacrifice wealth to push his extremely bizarre and toxic version of Christianity. Like, he believes that. And it reminds me of, I had this debate with McDermott, and I have that, you can look that up in my on my blog. Let me see if I can find the
while Rick is looking for his blog post here, I definitely want to point everybody to the description right now, because you can go down there and you can find the relevant blog posts that we've been talking about tonight that go a bit further into the topics that we've been discussing. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody here has read any of Richard Carrier's blog posts, but they're quite extensive, and they're great reference material for like, if you read it and then like you're in conversation and you're like, I've heard that before, you can easily go and search it up.
I'm one of the few long form bloggers who still exists and can make a living. And I do really appreciate the people who fund my work that make that possible. And for that reason, so I can do like in-depth analyses with a lot of links and sources, so that every one of my articles is a useful resource, right? Like, if you heard that, you can go there and you've got a resource. Mm-hmm. You've got arguments, you've got links, you've got cited sources and stuff like that. That's what I do. The article I was thinking of was the Carrier-McDermott debate, which worldview produces the better world? And that was one I debated with, I want to call him an ultra-conservative. I hesitate on that because, as I point out in that article, he's a very sincere Christian, insofar as that he actually takes positions that are very unpopular among conservative Christians because he's standing on principle. So, for instance, he's super conservative in terms of sexuality, just like Davidson, and in terms of how society should be organized. But he's pro kindness to immigrants, right? So he denounces, and he wrote an article denouncing the use of the states' rights rhetoric for defending the Civil War. Like, he actually took the side, like, yeah, the South fucking fought for slaves. It was just slaves. That's what you did. Let's just admit it. It was a sin, and that's his perspective. But normally you would get from conservative Christians is like, no, it was states' rights. It was right. It's all political rather than being honest. And he was very honest. And he was very honest about, like, we should be accepting immigrants as the downtrodden, like, downtrodden neighbor, the downtrodden foreigner, etc. Like, he's like, this is very Christ-like. We should be treating these people well, etc. That's very unpopular among the conservatives. So this is a very conservative guy, but he's very sincere. So he actually follows the logic to where it should go. makes him very unpopular. And I had this debate about whose worldview is better for the world, Christianity or secular humanism, basically. And that's the debate that Davidson clearly has never had, because he doesn't have any comprehension of what it is that we have to offer as an alternative to Christianity. And I think McDermott didn't know either until we had the debate. And so that debate was actually quite productive and interesting in that respect, because it showed two people who were sincere and honest, and he didn't use any tactics. That was the other thing, is like, he didn't use any dirty tricks in the debate. He was just an honest debater. He like made the arguments that he believed were correct. And I was like, that was super refreshing. That is not what I normally get from a Christian apologist. It's usually bullshit, rhetoric, gaming. It's usually like, that kind of manipulative stuff. Davidson reminds me of him in that respect, except that McDermott is someone that I actually might like trust. Whereas Davidson is a total fucking fascist. When he gets to policy, it's horrible. Like, I'm terrified of what this guy's policies are. Anyway, that was my slight comment on that. But we've got some questions, I hope.
Yeah, we've got some comments, questions, and everything like that. I believe we have, as of right now, 10. We've got 10 questions / comments kind of thing. Not all of them are going to be something we can interact with a lot, but Mark Rothenbuehler says, internet demons made me donate. Free will be damned. Enjoy the eternal flame broil.
Davidson would agree. Davidson would say that demons literally told you and manipulated you into giving godless engineer money. Yeah,
exactly. That the demons are working for me. I feel like I'd be making more money if that were the case, but I'll take.
No, it's the power of Christ. It's opposing, like, power of Christ is holding the demonic energy back, but it's losing. Once once Christians are a minority, then the demons are unleashed, and it'll be the Dark Ages, and hell will break loose, and you will make a lot of money. Apparently,
all I have to say is that if there is an eternal flame boil, there better be some shrimp, because I will be in. I don't care if I like it. And to be quite honest, if hell is as hot as they claim it is and everything like that, I would be perfectly comfortable with no sleeves all the time. I'm just saying it. I'm not particularly strong or nothing, but I prefer not sleeves, and shrimp. Like, those are the two. Anytime I go on vacation, it's shrimp and no sleeves. Like, those are the two requirements. Other than that,
you know what, man? You've just told God how to punish you. He'll send you to the land without shrimp.
Doesn't that mean I become like Christian, or like a very traditional Christian or Jewish? I mean,
no, it's it's the
you.
19th hell in which there is no shrimp, and it's Florida, but you have to dress like a Canadian, and you can't not.
Fuck. That would be hell. That would definitely be hell.
Yeah, right.
All right. Next up, we've got
Mario.
Yeah, Mario Marufo. I think I said that right. Marufo. Fear of the imaginary makes people incurious. It blinds them. It traps them in thought loops. It makes good people do bad things. It's a tool of the ruling class to keep the working class in chains.
Alas, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been able to identify the thought-stopping kind of techniques that have been out there, because it always gets to, well, God said it, and so it's like, that means you want me to stop thinking about it. Like, you want me to actively stop considering this and stop thinking about the logical implications of what you're saying. And
it's the people who notice that who get out, right?
Yeah.
And the people who don't notice that get stuck. And yeah, I mean, that's the reality.
Mario Marufo again says, wouldn't you say this all comes from working the metaphysical to the dialectic, and from the ideal to the material, instead of the opposite of that?
So Mario's a Marxist, so very big into dialectical materialism. I don't know how to answer this question here. This all comes from. I mean, it is true. like his worldview comes from that, right? Like he has his own metaphysical worldview. That's his cosmology. He keeps using the word cosmology. I think the rest of us would say ontology or metaphysics, but he was saying cosmology. That's what he means. And he's saying, like, from that, if you assume that cosmology, and then you can make all these assumptions and reach all these conclusions about the nature of reality, including the material. I think that is a correct description of what's happening in Davidson's mind, like how he gets there. And I think that, obviously the corrective method for that is to learn how to question. Well, I just put it this way. How do you ask the question, much less answer the question, how do I know if I'm wrong? And that's what someone like Davidson never asks and never gives an honest answer to himself, and thus never pursues. And I think if people ask, like, how would I know I was wrong, and sincerely get to an answer and then follow through, that's the path to the truth. And I think that's the only way to resolve these kinds of problems. But it requires someone to get there. You have to go through that process.
I don't really have meaningful input on this just because I really don't know what any of that means. I'm not a very philosophical person. Like, I can understand philosophical arguments and everything like that, but when you get into this much of the weeds,
right. And the language that's in this question is very hypertext, in the sense that it's based on an assumption that a lot of backstory about the specific use of these specific words, dialectic, for example. And most people don't have that, so that it's basically just a foreign language, essentially, right, to most folks.
I feel like it. Like, I feel like I understand Spanish better than this. All right, and then Mario Marufo again asks, does he legit quote Karl Marx a single time?
This is a question about Davidson, right? So I actually have his book up. Marx never appears in his book. Yeah, let's see. I'm actually literally searching the book right now because I have it up in my... Oh, weird. Oh, I hate that. Okay, let me see if I can get... AI sucks, everyone. AI makes everything worse. I'm just saying.
Yeah, so recently...
Okay. I can't even search for the word. So Marx is 0 hits. I tried communism, but it's giving me all of the permutations of the word. So it's giving me communications, communicated, community. I'm like, no, I want communism, motherfucker. But no, they're like, no, but surely I want to be helpful. I want to show you all the other versions of this word. No, just give me. And I tried in quotes. It doesn't work. Does anybody know in Kindle? Does anybody know how to force it to look for an actual string and not AI or bullshit?
Are you working the Kindle desktop version?
I'm in Cloud Reader right now, but
okay.
Okay.
I don't know. On the desktop version,
down, and communism doesn't appear. So if it appears in the book, it's very rare.
No, well, I mean, it was mentioned.
But Marx doesn't appear at all. He never mentions Marx. Never mentions Marx, much less quotes him.
Right. I mean, in the interview, communism was brought up, but it was by I'm sorry, I can't remember the female host's
Emily
name.
Yeah.
Emily. It was brought up by Emily in the thing, like communism. Like, why doesn't communism start communism?
And
like, that's what she said.
He said that their foreign policy was Leninist. I don't.
Yeah, something about Leninist.
I don't know if I misheard her. I don't know if it was Leninist, is what she said. And
no, Leninist,
I don't know what that is. So
Leninist was definitely brought up. They even had like a Lenin book or some kind of like image behind them that said Lenin. So I'm not exactly sure.
I missed that. I totally missed that. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much there, Mario.
Thanks, Mario.
I think we got a couple more from Mario maybe, but next is Kristen Hood. Luke 14:26. If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be he cannot be my disciple. What does that say about his Christian priorities?
Yeah, this captures the contradictoriness. Contradictoriness. That is a terrible contradictoriness. I'm trying to think of the correct word. Forget it. Okay, so it captures the fact that he contradicted himself a lot, certainly in the book. So like he has this idea that you have all these ideals, but then when he has policy, they reject all those ideals. And this is the example, like saying like, well, you're supposed to love everyone equally. Well, no, except you're supposed to love Jesus more. And then that then becomes a justification for all kinds of evils, right? Like once you can say that, well, following God is more important than treating your fellow man as your equal, well, then all bets are off, right? You can justify anything. And this is where you get to the idea. I did look into this non-combatant, the idea of laws of war, because it came up in the video. And so I looked into it and followed it along. But you have this idea that, yeah, you shouldn't kill innocents. But then they go on, they keep talking, unfortunately. And it's very vague as to who counts as an innocent, right? And so they give this idea of like all these things like, wow, and it becomes very similar to the justification for the firebombing of Berlin and Tokyo, right, during World War II, is this idea like, well, the Germans voted for Hitler, so they're combatants, right? They're responsible. So let's just fucking burn them. And that's the exact same logic that you find in Augustine, and Aquinas, and all of these other like Christian, supposedly brilliant moral thinkers of Christianity. The idea, like saying, like if you just quote someone saying like you shouldn't kill innocents in war, like, oh, look how enlightened. It's like, yeah, but keep reading. It's like, what does that mean? Like, who's the innocent? Who really is the innocent? Like, they're very vague on that. Like, there's a lot of loopholes as to who counts as an innocent and when. And that's also true, like in Lincoln's, I mentioned like the laws of war that Lincoln promulgated that became like sort of the, you know, the spark that lit the ultimate UN resolutions on and treaties on laws of war. Is this idea like, well, in certain circumstances, you just have to starve civilians, even if they're innocent. Like you just have to, right? And you know, if they come out like begging, like they're literally, so they have there's an actual line in there in the principles, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's the idea that someone's being besieged. So like you have a general who's hunkered behind the walls of a city, and you're besieging the town, and civilians come out, like civilians flee, saying like, look, fucking, we don't like this guy, we're fleeing, we're leaving the city. But the principle is like, it frames this as the general sends them out to confound the siege, right? Like it's an attack, right? Like sending the civilians out, like he sent them, like even though they're fleeing, he's like, he sent them. It was all strategy. Therefore, you are justified in forcing them back into the city by any means necessary, even if it happens to kill some people. Because it's a tactic and you have to resist it. Like, so there's all these like rationalizations by which the term innocent essentially loses its meaning, right? And so when you look at these, like, I think Davidson's the sort of person that he looks at these things and he sees like, oh, look, it says don't kill innocents, and he just doesn't read the next sentence. Like, yeah, but that's so qualified that it's almost a meaningless statement. And that's the truth. That's the reality of even Christian moralizing. Christian moral philosophy over the centuries has been like that. Like they'll say something that sounds nice, but if they keep talking, and then it doesn't sound so nice anymore. And so that's, you know, you have to take that into account. And I think Davidson doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thank you, Kristen, for your comment or question. I guess that was a comment. Next is Limited Light, who says some months ago, McClellan bid, which that's Dan McClellan, I believe. Do you know of Dan McClellan?
Not well, no.
Okay, he's a scholar. He used to work for the Mormon Church, I believe, and he left to become an independent scholar.
Right. I don't know.
I've had a run in.
Is he ex-Mormon or is he still Mormon?
I don't know. He doesn't really talk about it that much. He may still be Mormon. I'm not sure, but he's got this. His slogan is "Data over dogma." So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm sure I've run into this.
Yeah,
but I'm not intimately familiar. No.
I believe that's who Limited Light is talking about. That's the only McClellan that I know that would be known by McClellan. He had a vid that discussed pollution of the land. Why do fundamentalist or ex-Christian, Christian nationalists, sorry, thank you. Christian nationalists seem to go by this Old Testament thing, New Testament, personal responsibility for oneself and one's own sins. I do notice that there's a pretty big, I guess, deviation in a lot of the theology, because they'll cherry pick New Testament stuff, but then also sprinkle it with Old Testament stuff.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'm trying to see if I can find anything that connects. Yeah, I'm not seeing context for this, so I don't know how to answer this.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure what pollution of the land is, but I'm wondering, like, how do you feel about this whole mixing of the old, I guess mixing, but cherry picking, I guess, between the Old Testament and the New Testament, because that just seems to be very, very much a commonplace in modern apologetics.
It's one of those two-step dances, right? It's where, Jesus says not one jot or tittle will be removed until the end times. Mm-hmm. But then they'll also say that Jesus abolished almost all of the Old Testament. But then they'll cherry pick which things got abolished. So, like, Jesus never said that we're keeping the anti-gay stuff, but we're dropping the shrimp stuff, right? Like, that's not in Jesus. So how do you decide that, we're going to be anti-gay, but we're totally fucking guzzling shrimp? Like, how do you choose? Right? Like, what?
Listen, I don't mind the guzzling of shrimp. Okay. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying, like
Jesus.
Where does that come from? Right? Like, how do you decide which laws have been abolished and which are still true? Right. And so, but this idea of mixing the New Testament and the Old, it doesn't make any sense. Almost never, basically. Like, if you really were to do that, like, consistently, you would be a Jewish Christian, circumcised. You would, follow the dietary rules. You would not eat shrimp or bacon, yada, yada. You would not step on the shadow of a tombstone, like all of the things. You'd be a fucking hardcore Orthodox Jew. But that's not what happens. What happens is this arbitrary, just random cherry picking of what they want and don't want. It reminds me of, like, on Big Trouble in Little China, the movie, where there's a description of the Chinese and how they choose religions. It's like a buffet. You, like, choose what you want and reject what you don't. It's very random and arbitrary, and that's how Christians treat their religion. But then they go around and claiming, like, we have this absolutely solid, proven, fixed, objective religion, and like that. That's not what I'm seeing. Like, you're not coming at me with that. Like, you're coming at me with some arbitrary, like, cherry pick.
Doesn't
shit? I don't know.
Yeah, doesn't that make it indecipherable from like just no Christianity at all? Like I guess an atheist and how they determine their moral foundations. Like, it just, what you like, what you don't like, you don't like, and it's like.
Right. No, I mean, that's the
thing
reality.
I'm not bullshitting about where this is coming from.
Well, that's the reality of Christianity. I think atheists can actually explain why the morals they do choose and the morals they do reject, they can explain why. They can say, I can explain why, and I have a good, consistent reason why I reject the shrimp prohibition and also reject the anti-gay stuff, right? Like, I can explain why that makes sense. But the Christians don't have an explanation for why they drop the shrimp, but they keep the anti-gay stuff. Like, they have no coherent explanation of that. And that illustrates the point where Davidson's saying is, like, we need Christianity so that we have a foundation for our morality. But that's a lie. Like, Christianity provides zero foundation for any morality, right? Like, there's the way that Christians approach the idea of how you ground things, like, it makes no sense. And I have another article on Flanagan. People can look for the name Flanagan on my blog. And I have an article on divine command theory. It's based on this, your idea that morality is commanded by God, is impossible to make any sense of. It doesn't work. In fact, it's a completely broken indefensible way to ground morality. And I think that's something that we need to keep pointing out. Is like you actually keep claiming that you can ground morality in your religion, but you have no ground at all. Like your God is completely unbelievable. You can't defend any of your principles. They're fucking contradictory, arbitrary. Like you have nothing. You have nothing to offer. You keep claiming you have things to offer. You're like Donald Trump. You keep insisting that something is true, but you have nothing behind it. Like it isn't true. And I think that's the case, that we need to emphasize that more. But that does mean that atheists need to focus more on what is the reason that we adopt our principles and reject others. Like, so I think do atheists need to do more of what Christians aren't doing, which is actually ground their morality. And I do write about that, so people can check my blog for the morality drop down in my category menu and pursue that.
Yeah. Same here on my channel. Like I've got a morality playlist where I actually have a linked list of every time I've responded to somebody's argument from morality. And I just, I find it like one of the most, I guess, one of the poorest arguments for God's existence, especially when you're talking about Yahweh or any definition of God that we have now. Like I feel like it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it's terrible fiction. So that's one thing, is like you can point to fiction that has good role models for like what is a moral person, what is an immoral person. The Bible is shit for that. Like there is not a single legitimate hero, not a single moral role model anywhere in the entire Bible. And I'm including Jesus in that. And for people who don't believe me on that, I do have Jesus is an asshole. I have a thing on Christmas. So you can look at my blog on Christmas, and I have a whole paragraph on how Jesus is an asshole. But it emphasizes like Jesus is a terrible person. Like if you met this person as described in the Gospels, you would ditch this fucker. Like he was like, this guy's terrible. I don't want to have anything to do with him. I don't like him. He's not good company. And you know, but that's my point, is like there's no heroes in the Bible. It's a terrible work of fiction. If your goal is to say like, oh, we have great fiction that at least represents like ideals of heroism and ideals of moral exemplars, it's like, no, you don't. Like I can point to a zillion I can list 100 books that are explicit fiction that have better moral role models than appear anywhere in the Old Testament or New Testament. And you know, that's the reality.
I agree. Limited Light just says hi. Hi there, Limited Light. I do have a video coming out with Limited Light, because Limited Light has a particular set of skills, and we address this mathematical argument that this one YouTuber made, and so that'll be coming out soon.
Well, let's hear more about that. Like, what's the argument?
Oh, I mean, you know, it basically, if I can remember it, basically he argues that, you know, infinite regresses can't exist, and he makes this argument about complex numbers, where basically like the farther we get in our mathematical understanding, the more it deviates away from, I guess, reality. And so he says that complex numbers don't represent anything in reality, and so therefore it represents something more supernatural.
Yeah.
And it's like electrical engineers are like, what the fuck are you talking about?
They represent ratios. Imaginary numbers are rotation operators. Yeah, there's a ton of physics in there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I should have you on to go through all, because he went this person, he's called the Reform Zoomer is who it is, and he laid out like 10 arguments against God, and he refuted every single one of them. So it's just it's ridiculous.
But the argument from complex numbers, I find that interesting. I have run into that. It's been like maybe 20 years since I've heard someone try to argue that. It's been a long time, but there's a whole book. Someone wrote a book on the imaginary number. I can't remember the title of the book, but they go into the history of it and how, in fact, the square root of -1 it is actually a rotation operator. So it actually has a geometric, like a physical geometric meaning. And so it's not divorced from reality. And it actually corresponds to things like in radio, like construction of radios and things like that. Like it like matters, right? So anyway, that is definitely off topic, but
well, yeah. So, and I started out my engineering career as training to be an electrical engineer, and so like complex numbers is a very important part of that.
Right. Yeah. No, you're a perfect person to interact with that argument. I agree.
Yeah. Mario Marufo also said, communism's been keeping people working, reading, clothed, and fed in Vietnam, Cuba for over 50 years, even under constant Western imperialist threat.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a valid point about like Cuba, for instance. Like if you isolate a country economically and then complain that it suffers economically, it's hard to like tease out that it's the economic system in Cuba and not the embargo that is the problem. There are other problems with Cuba, but Vietnam is a good example. I actually like the hybrid states, so like Sweden or even Norway as an example of a mixture of capitalism and socialism. But the thing is like no country has actually done what Marx asked for. So like one of the things that Marx's principles is that you can't start a capitalist venture, like say a factory, and claim to own it. And the basic idea is like, if you start a factory and you have, let's say 100 employees, you all own it. And so the employees get an equal share of the profits. The employees get an equal, like a democratic decision on who's the manager, like what are the policies? How are we going to run this factory? So Marx's idea was basically to divorce capital from control, right? So like if you're running a business, then the employees should have equal say in the running of that business. It should have equal benefits from the profits of that business, etc. So he didn't really say that we should have the organized system of Vietnam or that we should have what happened in the USSR. That's not in Marx, right? Like his idea was more like the idea of like an individual owning a whole factory doesn't make sense. So, and anyway, one can argue against Marx's theory, etc. The thing is like it is true that Marx's actual model was never implemented, has never been implemented anywhere. The closest we've gotten are co-ops. So like if you've ever been to like a co-op grocery, you can find these in like Berkeley and Portland and stuff. That's the closest you get maybe to what Marx had in mind, which was the idea that the workers own the factory, the workers own the business, and that you can't be like the capitalist who sucks all the wealth out of them and exploits them and keeps them down and low paid and so on. And you walk away a rich man while they have nothing, basically. They see nothing of the profits of the industry.
Well, I mean, in modern America, you would think that more people would be on board with at least reducing the wealth gap between
and you do see
the CEOs and the workers.
And that's even, it's so funny that you see like the G7, right? Like these fucking ultra rich countries, ultra rich countries meet to say how should we run the economy of the world. Even they are complaining about that. Like, oh fuck, there's too much income disparity. It's becoming a problem. But from their point of view, it's becoming a problem because we're annoying. All of us lowly people who are being cheated out of resources by these resource hoarders. We're becoming a problem, and so they see it as a problem, and so now they need to like calm us down by like giving us the bigger share of what we've created. Anyway, now we're getting really off topic. Actually, not so much, because this gets back to T.S. Eliot. This was T.S. Eliot's point, is that Christianity should be doing this. If you want to have a Christian-based world, you should have less capitalists. Actually, no capitalists. You should have like Elon Musk could not exist as a person at his wealth level and a station. So it would not exist in T.S. Eliot's worldview. And you don't see Davidson arguing that, saying like we should really share wealth more. Workers should share more of the profits of their industry. like there's no practical, real moral recommendations. Davidson is all obsessed with sex and gender. It's sex and gender, and we're being persecuted for persecuting people who have sex and don't agree with our gender policies, right? Like, so that's what Davidson is doing. He's not doing the actual moral thing, which is what T.S. Eliot was advocating, which is this idea that we really should share more of the wealth. We should have less resource hoarders. Resource hoarding should actually be immoral, if not outright illegal. And so that's the thing that gets lost in these conversations, I think.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Mario. Marufo. Next, we've got Grazy 174 says, "Did Hitler believe in the bodily resurrection?"
Unknown. So like we don't have that discussion from him. We don't have him making fun of it, and we don't have him discussing it. The only thing we have from Hitler, if it's reliable, and asterisk on that, if it's reliable, the only thing we have from him on that is that he appears to have believed that he would end up in heaven and get to hang out with cool intellectual people from history and have conversations with them. And he talks about this. That suggests a model which is the more modern deviation model, which is the idea that we're going to go to heaven and that's just it, right? Like we get some other body there, like our body down here just stays down here and rots or burns up or whatever, which is the modern view. That was not the ancient view. Like modern Christians imagine that they die and they go to heaven and that's it. The idea of an actual resurrection generally is only adopted by like the ultra conservative Christians, where they're trying to maintain this ancient view that your body would literally rise out of the grave and that you get to live in that body. Yay. But it's not clear whether Hitler believed that specifically. Lots of Christians don't. Like lots of Christians think that you just go to heaven and that's it. Your body stays in the grave and burns up or whatever. But there are like the conservative Christians who think that your body will rise. And again, I don't know if Hitler thought that or not.
Yeah. I because I've deeply researched this because it was a topic of a video, and I haven't heard anything specifically about resurrection, but a lot about, God, or at least the God of Christianity and Jesus and stuff, but not his resurrection. Gracie also asked, did Hitler have any takes on Catholic Mariology? Is that Mariology or Mariology?
Mariology. It means the study of Mary, the Virgin. So
I was thinking
again,
Super Mario Brothers.
Asterisk. But if we trust what we have, it suggests that he secretly bought in, like publicly he was a Catholic, so he believes in the full Virgin Mary bullshit. But privately, it looks like he thinks or thought that Mary actually did have sex with a Roman soldier, and therefore Jesus was an Aryan. And this, it wasn't Hitler alone who thought this. This was a fundamental tenet of positive Christianity. It was a very popular sect of Christianity among the Nazis, that they actually believed this, that Jesus was literally the begotten son of a Roman legionnaire and therefore was an Aryan and not a Jew. That appears to be what Hitler thought privately and therefore sincerely. Again, asterisk.
I wonder.
We know.
Totally speculative, and I don't think that we'll ever know. But I wonder if that whole ideology really appealed to him because of the fact that wasn't he like half Jewish?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know that that's settled.
Okay.
So I haven't looked into that. So to the best of my knowledge, that's something that's discussed, but I don't think that it's a fact that's been established. But I haven't checked into it, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done a deep dive into it either, or at all. But I remember that being discussed out there, like, oh, he's half Jewish, and that's why he hates Jews, or something like that.
That doesn't make any sense. But anyway, yeah.
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 Yeah. But anyways, Mario Marufo says, is a photon energized space-time itself? This seems really kind of off the wall.
Very off topic. For those who are interested, check my blog and look for superstring theory as metaphysical atheism. And where I talk about this, where particles might actually just be fluctuations in space-time. But yeah, it's off topic. We won't go into it here.
Yeah, interesting. I'm gonna have to find that article because I mean, I'm a very slow reader. Like I don't know what it is with me, but I slow read, so it takes me a while to get through long posts. But I do like there are ones that I'm like, oh, I've got to read all of this.
Yeah, the bottom line is we don't know the answer to this question, right? And so what I do is explore a hypothesis. Is if we suppose superstring theory is true. Then we can deduce certain things, like that everything is a fluctuation in space-time. It's just that space-time has more dimensions than we're aware of for complex reasons. But once you do that, that's the thing. That's the beauty of superstring theory, is that if you posit these compactified dimensions, you can explain the entire standard model, which is all of the particle physics that we know. You can explain every aspect of it. Like why are there 8 gluons? Why are there 8 types of gluon? Why do they have the mass they do? Why do they behave? Why do they have the properties they do? Why do they have the spin characteristic they do? And so on. You can explain all this in terms of just geometry. And that's really elegant. And it's hard to think that that's not going to turn out to be true in some sense. But then you have all of the quantum loop gravity people are like screaming at the screen right now, like, no, superstring theory is false. It's quantum loop gravity. So it's unresolved. But it's an interesting philosophical question, and I think there's a lot of fruitful analytical avenues there. But anyway, that's like you said, that's way off topic.
Yeah. And then finally, we've got Jesus Tales, who called into the call-in show that I had recently, said Jesus is based on OT Jesuses. Jesus myths predate the Gospels by centuries. Jesus Nun, Jesus Jehozadak, Elishua, and son of David Absalom.
Yeah, I see what they're doing here. That's, of course, talking about the Gospel Jesus. So... and I think that's even I don't know about all of these examples, but it is certainly mainstream. It is a mainstream position, not even a fringe position, but a mainstream position in Jesus studies, that the stories about Jesus in the Gospels, many of them are built out of stories of prior persons in the Old Testament. So, for example, Elijah, Elisha, Moses, etc. It's really difficult to come up with any plausible Joshua reconstruction, but the Jehozadak one, yeah, like you can see ideas being pulled from there. Like Jesus ben Jehozadak was famous, or possibly completely legendary, priest of the Second Temple. He was the first priest of the Second Temple. So there are stories about him, or predictions, or whatever, in, for example, Zechariah, that seem to have formed the basis of later Christians coming up with ideas about their Jesus. That's different from the Jesus as originally conceived, because the gospel Jesus is not the same person. But you could say, for example, that the first Christians who were constructing their idea of Jesus may have really gotten ideas from Zechariah about Jesus ben Jehozadak, reinterpreting Zechariah as predicting things about their man rather than the first priest of the Second Temple, and thus building their eschatology and building their theology and building their soteriology around their interpretations of those stories of Jesus characters in the Bible, and like Jesus ben Jehozadak, for example. Entirely plausible. Can we prove it conclusively? No, but it's definitely worth looking at.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much there, Jesus Tales. And then finally, we've got Gray Z 174 again, who says, I guess the Ben Pantera thing does ruin the perpetual virginity. Does that also mean they don't think she was assumed into heaven and intercedes for us?
Yes. So positive Christians absolutely reject all saint cult. So the idea that Mary can do things for you, the whole Marianist system in Catholicism, absolutely rejected and laughed at by positive Christians. So that's definitely true. I don't know what else to say about that, but
yeah, wouldn't that this would be a weird kind of intersect between how the Nazis viewed the religion and Davidson's position, because I would think that Davidson would also reject like Catholic types of ideology,
it's
wouldn't
a
he?
good question. Hold on, I'm running some searches in his book.
He doesn't strike me as a Catholic, so I feel like he's very much one of those, I guess, maybe purist
He has
Protestants.
like a certain he has a girl crush on Catholicism. I do think, like, obviously Protestants also believe in the Virgin Mary. They just don't have as much of an elaborate build on top of that, right? Like their retconning of Mary is much less elaborate than the Catholics, right? I do see, she's actually the Virgin Mary, as the word Virgin Mary, like the phrase Virgin Mary, comes up several times in his book. I don't have time to like go into them, but to actually evaluate what he thinks of them. But they're all like incidental backstory stuff. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Well, now a lot of the things that he was mentioning, I've heard come out of certain ultra conservative, right wing, traditionalist Catholic people who are hold the same views as Davidson, in that they're like, oh, my version of Christianity is the only true version. Everybody else is effectively an atheist. And
I've had a hard time figuring that out. I was just, what's his full name? It's John something Davidson.
John Daniel? I remember, because I was thinking, damn, Daniel.
Yeah. So, I guess I should tell people this. He is a senior editor at the Federalist, and so is Emily, or Emily's an editor at the Federalist. So there is a little bit of nepotism going on in that video.
To be fair, Emily, the host, did mention that they are connected in that way.
Oh, she did. Okay,
yeah. She did at the very beginning. I cut that out because I didn't feel like it was important to the content about what was being said.
Yeah, I can't see any statements whether he himself is a Catholic or what his religious view is. I get the strong impression, like he talks about Catholicism as an outsider, but as an admirer, which is very typical of like 21st century Christian, like evangelical Christians. I don't know if he's evangelical, but evangelical Christians also talk about Catholicism in that way. Unlike 100 years ago when they totally fucking hated Catholics. But there's been, like, ever since Reagan, there's been a kind of like a unification. Like they sort of like a truce between Catholics and Protestants, is to like, we're going to agree to achieve common goals kind of thing. So I don't know. I don't know what his actual religion is. And it's very, like, almost deliberately avoided talking about it in all of the obvious places I can find.
Yeah.
No idea.
We'll have to look into it. And there is a final one here. Jesus, son of Nun, was rejected by Israel, and 40 years later Jerusalem was destroyed. I'm not sure what that's supposed to mean, but maybe there's
I would need sources on that to know what you're talking about.
Yeah. But anyways, thank you so much there, Richard, for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. I'm glad that we were able to kind of talk about this. Me
too. Yeah.
Before you sent it to me, I had no idea that this even existed, but it is rife with like inaccuracies and everything that needs to be addressed, especially in this election season, considering it's probably the end of America as we know.
Well, that reminds me to point out that this is no fringe thing. So I checked.
Right.
I checked. His book is number 7, or it was when I checked, was number 7, like the 7th most selling book on Amazon under the subject of history of civilization and culture, and number 14 in political conservatism and liberalism. So that's where it's assigned, to those two categories. So number 7 and number 14 on Amazon. And Amazon has a ton of bullshit. So like, that's impressive to be that high ranking. So it's definitely gaining attention. Like, this is not a fringe thing.
Right.
And it is representative of a very extreme form of Christian nationalism. His arguments, even his obsessions, like the video doesn't go into like his obsession with sex, like all the stuff about abortion and trans rights and gay people. Like, you really get that from the book. Like, he's just like, half the book is just obsessed with sex. It's like, it's almost all he's talking about. Even when that's not what he's talking about, he's talking about euthanasia briefly, and he's talking about social media, but mostly because it turns kids away from Christianity. And then the other half of the book is him complaining about being persecuted for persecuting people. It's basically like how you can define the other half of the book. But that's very representative of a mindset that you see very commonly to a very large percentage, minority, but still a large percentage of the American public. So it's a relevant video, and I think it's a relevant book in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, if you're definitely looking to get up to speed with the Christian nationalist rhetoric, like the most, I guess, might be good for like getting a huge swath of different Christian nationalist arguments. This would probably be the book that I point to. Just like if you want to know the craziest shit that's being said, fucking look at this.
Yeah, right.
Demonic chat GPT.
Yeah, I would qualify that in the sense that it is not explicitly white supremacist. And it's funny, like one of the things I was going to say in this is like, the reason I didn't read the book thoroughly is that it's like reading Mein Kampf. And I don't know if you've read Mein Kampf, but you really get tired of the constant whinging about the same grievances. Like you just get tired. And it's like, I can't, like, why do I need to keep reading this? Like, I can't stand it. And like every time he like keeps going on about the Jews and he comes back about that subject, and like, I just been there, done that. Like, I can't stand it. So it's hard. It's a struggle to read Mein Kampf, and it's not really that long a book. This book is like 340 like text pages, and it gets like that. Like, it's like Mein Kampf. Like, you like, oh my God, like how many more complaints about trans things can I like handle? Like, I'm tired of this. Like, I'm tired of the same thing over and over again. Like, how long can you talk about euthanasia and you just keep saying the same points over, and you keep using ridiculous examples? Like, you get tired of it. So that's a warning about the book. But that's very typical of this entire genre. Like, you're not going to find anything that isn't like that. You just get tedious. Like, you really have to struggle to keep going because it becomes so tediously repetitive and so tediously annoying. And like so many places, like, oh my God, I want to fucking fact check this, but I know it's a complete waste of time. Anyway, just be warned. That's my trigger warning for the book. Yeah. But you're right. It is representative, and it actually is more representative than the white supremacist stuff in the sense that it isn't white supremacist, right? Like, so like there are more Christians who would be comfortable giving you this book than giving you something that was really explicitly white supremacist. Even if they themselves are a white supremacist, they would rather you read this book because they're worried about scaring you off, right? This is more, I would say, like mainstream ultra-conservatism. And that's the value of it. And also, like, the honesty of it is the another value of it. It's not a Trojan horse. It's not trying to trick people. This is literally what he believes, including the demon stuff. And also, like, when he gets to policy, like, he just is flat out, like, honest about his policy. And like, okay, fascist, gotcha. Like, he doesn't hide it behind dog whistles. He doesn't, like, couch it. Like, it's just like, here's what we should do. Like, this and this and this. And like, okay, thank you for telling me what you want to do. That's horrible, but noted. But that's the other value. That's the other value of this book is that. So, yeah. And that's it.
So it's an honest book in how horrible Christian
and horrible and inaccurate it is, right?
Well, Rick, thank you so much for joining us tonight,
bet.
and really appreciate it. Just for everybody watching, we will not have a normal stream tomorrow night, but I will be on Godless Granny's channel on
Awesome.
Saturday
Yeah.
at 3:30 p.m. So definitely go. I'll have something in the community tab soon for that, but just be warned, no normal stream tomorrow night. Rick, again, thank you so much for joining us. I hate Christian nationalism, but I love having you on the channel.
I love talking about other things, so it's been great being on. And because I have had my fingers and toes in many other subjects, and not just the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah.
So yeah,
it seems like a lot of people don't understand that.
Yeah, I have lots of. I've done a lot of cool shit other than that. So yeah, and I love talking about it. Yeah, it was good to do this. I'm glad. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no problem. Everybody, make sure you visit the blog links that are in the description. And if you feel so inclined, please support Dr. Carrier on his blog by becoming a Patreon member. There's links there if you want to do that. And I guess everybody have a wonderful night and an awesome weekend. I've got like an extended weekend because it's Memorial Day on Monday. So I guess I will see you heathens next week. And bye, y'all. Make sure you stand up and use your voice against Christian nationalism because it sucks.